We are here to preview the entire 2024-25 NFL season. We are almost a week away from it, a week on Thursday, which is probably when most of you will be watching this. If you catch us after the live stream, we do appreciate you tuning in. Then we're also going to go over the final cuts for the NFL season, what it means for your team, and then go over the 2022 NFL draft and some teams that probably aren't going to make the playoffs this year that made it last year, because usually there's about 4 to 7 of the previous year's teams that made the playoffs that don't make it the next year.
Absolutely. We're going to go over all of the roster cuts, all of the teams that will make the playoffs, our awards, who will be the MVP, coach of the year, defensive player of the year, and more. So you're not going to want to miss it. We go over all the latest news in the NFL. The Brickyard officially back. We got one more week until the regular season. We'll have football from now until February. Life is good. But first,
yeah, life is good.
But first, we got to give a salute to the fallen soldiers. The most vicious time in the NFL, the draft cuts and the preseason cuts right before the regular season. Some notable soldiers that we lost today, the one last round, what they call Black Monday. Friend of the show, Kadarius Toney, officially cut by the Chiefs. Your thoughts on Kadarius Toney getting cut?
Well, I said I could not put the Kansas City Chiefs last season in my top 5 unless Kadarius Toney was off of the team. And then what happened right before the playoffs? The Chiefs tied a rope around him, and Andy Reid reeled him in, said, "You're not going to play in any of these important games because we need to get back on the Brickyard top 5 teams." It's the most confidential top 5. It's a document that most teams only dream of being on. The Kansas City Chiefs looked around the room and said, "Kadarius Toney, you're holding us back, man. We need to put you on the bench because we would rather have another tight end fill in for you. Maybe we'll replace you with someone like Taysom Hill. Maybe we'll ask a rugby player to take your spot." And that's exactly what they did. And then this is further confirmation that the Chiefs are solely committed to not just the playoffs this year, not just the 3rd Super Bowl in the row, helping Patrick Mahomes get closer and closer to that all-time great, challenging the GOAT status of Tom Brady with 3 Super Bowls in a row, something that Brady has never done. So now the regular season is now more important to them because we're not even going to mess around with Kadarius Toney. In fact, we're going to bring back TikTok boy, the Fortnite guy, the streamer, now turned controversial ex-personality, Juju Smith-Schuster. That's who we're going to replace you with.
And honestly, he's an improvement. Kadarius Toney couldn't catch a football last year. It was terrible for him. He was a nightmare. So bye-bye. Good riddance, Kadarius Toney. Chiefs, welcome back to the top 5 for the Brickyard. We look forward to seeing you on the list many times throughout the year.
We'll take the risk of Juju's hip shattering instead of having you on the team because you dropped the ball too much.
Exactly. And Juju, he will fit into that number 4 wide receiver very nicely. Another fallen soldier, friend of the show, Boston Scott. Was like the 3rd string on the Eagles, bounced around. Now he's on the Rams, got cut by the Rams. R.I.P. Boston Scott. We might not see him again.
Yeah, that was a tough loss. I mean, Boston Scott was one of those guys where maybe your casual fan didn't know who he was, but he would come in moments for the Philadelphia Eagles, and suddenly you would see flashes from him. He would be an energizer in a game, and he really embodied the Philadelphia Eagles personality for a little bit, just being a guy to come in and give you an energy boost. But now he went to the Rams, just not the same vibe. LA is not for him. I think I know a great team that's a fit for him, and I think you have that same team on your mind as well.
Oh yeah, the Patriots, Boston. Honestly, with
Scott.
the way that with the way that their GM seems to operate, they're going to see Boston. They're going to see Scott, just like Eli Apple when he got drafted by the Giants. It's the same idea. They're like Big Apple, Eli Apple. Boston
Eli
Scott,
Manning?
Boston, Massachusetts. He's got to be one of our 13 running backs. So Boston Scott will be a Patriot. So you heard it here first.
Competing with Brandon Bolden.
Speaking of the Patriots, Patriots cut Bailey Zappi today, to no surprise. R.I.P. Bailey Zappi, lost soldier.
It's finally over. And my question is, why would you even play him in preseason? Because I know the first preseason game, Drake May only plays one drive, and then after that, we have to sit and watch Bailey Zappi play now. So it's between him. I guess there's no really a fit there with Joe Milton on the team. They're like, okay, let's get Bailey Zappi out of there. But why would you even play him in the preseason then? He just was a waste of time. He's the most average, barely a backup quarterback and can fill in for you, but I don't even understand why they brought him into preseason.
I don't know why either. But now that we have Joe Milton, Drake May, and then Jacoby Brissett, Patriots had no reason to have Bailey Zappi. In fact, honestly, they probably could have traded him, but ultimately somebody will pick him up. I think he'll be a fine backup, but I don't. His career is as a backup as it is. Allen Robinson might have had his last destination in New York. He was cut as well. Allen Robinson was really good for a while with the Bears, bounced around a few teams. It looks like his career might be over after this cut.
Yeah. Allen Robinson made a lot of people look stupid last year. He went to the Rams. So, like, oh my God, Allen Robinson to the Rams. If you're in maybe not a 10-team league, maybe a 12 to 14 man league, he could definitely be your number one or number two receiver, but had a great stint with the Bears. No hate to him. And then just went to the Rams. Couldn't really find his groove, but lost out in a weak wide receiver room with the Jets. Hate to see it.
And then our last person we should shout out here, also a part of the 2022 draft. Interestingly enough, we'll talk about that later. Desmond Ridder, cut by the Cardinals. Devastated a lot of Cardinals fans, or really just one Cardinal fan I can think of specifically. Desmond Ridder, cut by the Cardinals. Thoughts on that, if any?
Good. Bury him. I don't want Desmond Ridder to turn into this character that keeps showing up where he has no business being in the NFL anymore. We saw him last season. It was the most frustrating quarterback to watch. Was it him or was it Arthur Smith? Well, looks like a big part of it was Desmond Ridder last year, and don't want to just see him hanging around. And I think when it came down to as well, Kyler has probably a high chance of getting hurt because he has an injury history, and we don't actually want this guy stepping in or feel comfortable with that. So I think he would be better suited somewhere else in maybe Canada, but ideally Australia or maybe North Korea wants to start a football league. He could help get it up and running there.
And then not only that, we had 3 of the 2022 quarterback class cut today. Last being Matt Corral, who has yet to take a official regular season snap in the NFL, as well as other news yesterday with Malik Willis being traded to the Packers for a 7th-round pick. So within one day, we had Desmond Ridder get cut, Matt Corral get cut, Bailey Zappi get cut, and Malik Willis traded for a bag of chips. That's pretty much half the quarterbacks that were taken in that draft that were either cut or traded for nothing within 2 years of each other. Now, I wanted to review that class real quick because the QB class of that draft might be the worst, if not actually, I'm going to say it, the worst QB class in NFL history. When have you found a quarterback class where not only is only one quarterback taken in the first round, but collectively at large, all of them are backups within 2 years? When has that ever happened?
Yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but also the fact that they're backups within 2 years, normally you start out as a backup for 2 years, maybe a Jordan Love situation there, but the fact that every single quarterback taken outside of, I believe, Brock Purdy was in this draft, is that correct?
Yes. So
And no, they're all backups, and pretty much all of them have either been cut or traded in the most bizarre ways. I'm pretty sure Matt Corral was the guy that the Patriots cut, brought back, and then cut again, and then they brought him back like 2 or 3 times.
you know what? You know what? The craziest lore with Matt Corral with them, they injured him in the preseason, his rookie year. I think they like either tore his ACL or they broke his collarbone. The very next year, he gets cut by the Panthers, and then the Patriots pick him up. He gets injured again, and then the very next year they cut him. They sign him. They cut him, and then this time around, I believe he was on the Raiders. Well, no, he was on the Vikings. They cut him.
Vikings.
So it's been brutal. But the QBs, Kenny Pickett, Steelers, they just got him. They just sent him to the Eagles for nothing earlier this offseason. Desmond Ritter, obviously, we just said just got cut. Malik Willis was traded for a bag of chips. We knew within game one, maybe Malik Willis isn't the guy. Bailey Zappi. Sam Howell just got traded to the Seahawks later this offseason for, I want to say it was a 6th-round pick they gave. And then Skylar Thompson, who's still a backup. He actually just beat out Mike White for the QB2 in Miami. And then ultimately the only quarterback of any relevance is Brock Purdy, who was the last pick in the draft. He's literally, not only is he carrying the 49ers, who missed on Trey Lance, and he was terrible with the Cowboys this past preseason game, but he's also carrying that whole draft up because without him, there's not a single starter after 2 years. This draft is terrible for QBs.
Yeah, it's probably the worst QB draft of all time because Brock Purdy is the only one in it. And he was taken. It's not like where Tom Brady is taken and there's other good quarterbacks in the draft. It's every single quarterback is a bust, but you could call it because people were excited from Malik Willis. And typically you could play a game where if you go to a school where there has never, ever been an NFL starter from, maybe that guy isn't an NFL starter. And going into that draft, I was a little bit worried if people like, oh, well, he doesn't have good players around him because they're one of the worst Division One schools in the country. But at the same time, no one from that school has seen success in the NFL. It's not like a South Dakota State. Like this is Liberty University. This is not some school that's known for pumping out quarterbacks or having amazing coaching.
Yeah, and I believe they're D2 if I'm not mistaken. I don't even know if they're D1. So that was a nightmare for them.
If they're D1,
And
they're at the bottom.
yeah, they're a low D1 team. Like they're not even playing with they're not even playing with NFL players against them at that point. So it was a nightmare. Really, even if I'm looking at the rest of the draft, like their corner, the only like position that really excelled was the corners. Like you have Sauce Gardner, you have Trent McDuffie, Derek Stingley was drafted in this draft as well, Tariq Woolen. So the corners were good. You had a couple of good edge rushers. You got Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson. Boye Mafe from the Seahawks was drafted. But then I look at the rest of them. I know it's still a little too early to tell, but like linebackers, we got Quay Walker, who's nice. Nakobe Dean, we haven't seen much of. Running backs right now, we have Brees Hall, Kenneth Walker, James Cook, and Rashard White. Could turn out to be pretty solid. And then like the wide receivers, a little early on. Garrett Wilson looks really good. Chris Olave, Jamison Williams. We'll see how he does this year. George Pickens. Some of them are still too early to tell, but a lot of these drafts, I feel like cornerback's been solidified. Quarterbacks, obviously not. But I don't know. This draft in general just seems like it was pretty bad.
Yeah, that's a weird running back draft as well because you say all those names, and the one that jumps out the most is Kenneth Walker. But even him, he's had his struggles over the past to maintain a certain level of at least consistently where you're like, Kenneth Walker is a guy, but is he the guy? I don't know if he's following in the footsteps of Marshawn Lynch, but he's like, if he's top 20 running backs, maybe he's like 19 or 18.
Yeah. I mean, if you look later in the draft, they got Kyron Williams in the 5th round, Jerome Ford, and Isaiah Pacheco in the 7th round.
Jerome Ford.
Jerome, we love Jerome Ford on this show.
Tank.
He's a beast. He's going to be starting for the Browns the first 4 games. So Jerome Ford, really solid. I don't think he's ever going to be like a stud, but he's a really nice piece. Running back class is weird though. Like James Cook still remains to be seen. A lot of people expect him to be really good this year. Brees Hall is another example. Somebody who like could be really good if that offense isn't god awful. They signed a bunch of old offensive linemen, so that should give you some hope, I suppose. Rashad White, maybe he's good. A lot of these guys, I just don't think any of them are going to be like it's not going to be the 2017 running back class. You're not going to see Kamara, Aaron Jones, and Christian McCaffrey. These guys, I feel like, are all going to be like good, not great, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And with Brees Hall, he's definitely probably the best running back in that draft class. But for the Jets, it's they've never had anyone who has a threat to push the ball down the field. And in spite that, he's been the only real playmaker for that offense because Garrett Wilson has tried, but with Zach Wilson throwing him the ball over these years, it's like there's no real threat that the Jets have had in the past 3 to 4 years of actually getting the ball down the field. Actually, 5 years because you had Darnold before that.
We could go back all the way to the 60s if we wanted to with the Jets. Really, actually, maybe the only person you can give them their flowers for is Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's maybe their best quarterback they've ever had. But otherwise, you got to go all the way back to the 70s to get a guy who could push it down the field. Chad
Yeah.
Pennington, maybe. Who else do they have? Their quarterback situation's
Joe
historically
Namath.
terrible. Yeah, Mr. Hollywood Joe, they say. But, they have their playoffs aspirations this year. They finally have their top 5 quarterback of all time ready to go. Achilles intact, ayahuasca in brain. So, maybe this is their year they make the playoffs. And we do know that every year there's 4 to 7 different playoff teams each year. In this past year, definitely some teams I think that will miss the playoffs potentially. So I have the list of these playoff teams from last year. I'm going to go through each of them with you. You can say whether or not you believe they're going to make the playoffs again, if they're a lock, you have your questions with, or they're just flat out going to miss it in general.
Okay.
So first team is the Eagles. I'm just starting the NFC. Eagles, they were the wild card. Do you think they win their division? Are they a lock for the playoffs? In the middle, you have your questions, or they're going to miss the playoffs.
Yeah, I would say I'm 75% with the Eagles right now. I do think that they should make the playoffs just because of their division, but would I be surprised if they melted down? No, not really, but I think they should be a lock just because of how weak their division is right now. Cowboys don't have a run game. You bring in Saquon Barkley, but on the other end, I'm like, you bring in Kellen Moore, who is a name everyone likes saying. They're like, oh, Kellen Moore. And then with the Cowboys, they get rid of him. And then he goes to the Chargers and he's immediately fired there. And the Chargers have one of their worst offensive outputs ever. So it's like Kellen Moore's one of those names I'm kind of worried about. And then same with the defensive coordinator and Nick Sirianni. So I believe in the players on this team, but at the same time, the coaching is where I have the real question. But thankfully, they're in the same division with Mike McCarthy, Daniel Jones, and the Commanders.
Yeah, that's fair. Next team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They brought back a lot of these guys. They won their division. They were 9-8. Are they a lock? Are they a maybe? Are they a no?
I think they're a maybe. I think last year they definitely benefited from having, I don't know, one of the worst divisions in the NFL. I mean, the Saints were the Derek Carr wreck, Dennis Allen walking around like a uptight suburban mom out there, only to be topped by Arthur Smith yelling at him to cap off his firing with the Atlanta Falcons and his disastrous first round pick after first round pick and not knowing how to use them, and Desmond Ritter. And then the Panthers turning into one of the worst NFL franchises in history. But now the Falcons have a new identity here. Pick up Matthew Judon from the Patriots. He wants to play for a contract. That should be scary if you're a quarterback, especially Baker Mayfield. And then you're getting Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix, who look pretty good in preseason. So if he has to step in, I think at week 6 or 8 for Kirk, I think he could be pretty good. So right now, leaning Falcons, but the Bucks are a maybe.
Yeah, I think maybe's fair. I do think that they have a much tougher division. I think 2 of the 3 teams that they faced got better. Like I think the Panthers, they're gonna maybe go from 2 wins to 4, and then I think the Falcons are going to be much better now that they actually have a quarterback to throw it to, or throw it with, I should say. So I lean closer to no than maybe, but I do think that the Bucks are still. They should at least be competing for the wild card. Nothing else. They just might not repeat. And then the next team is the Rams. Puka Nacua, Matt Stafford, Cooper Cup. Yes, no, maybe.
200 Yeah, 200% yes. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Rams win the division next year. I mean, Kyle Shanahan Super Bowl losses have led to extreme Super Bowl hangovers. I mean, the Falcons the year after they lost the Super Bowl, looked like they didn't even know what football was. I know he ended up leaving after that Super Bowl to the 49ers, but the Niners, when they lost the Super Bowl, the next year, pretty much everyone got hurt. And then we have year two, Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford giving it one last hurrah. Sean McVay knows this, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them win the division and be a dark horse Super Bowl candidate. So 200% yes on the Rams.
I agree. I'm worried about Christian McCaffrey's injury that he had in preseason. It's the injury that he's had in every other season that he's been sidelined for extended periods of time, whether it's with Carolina or with San Fran. So I am worried about that. And then, like you mentioned, the injuries that piled up, Super Bowl hangover, they have a lot looming over. So I do think the Rams could benefit from that.
Yeah. I mean, Kyle Shanahan melts down, but it's Steve Wilkes' fault, right? Because he forgets
Sure.
that he needs to run the ball
Yeah,
or the
exactly.
rules.
Next team, we have the Detroit Lions, friend of the show. Yes, no, maybe that they bring it back to the playoffs.
Absolutely, they bring it back to the playoffs. The thing with the Detroit Lions, everyone's talking about they're going to have this massive hangover after losing in the conference championship games. Their division got better, but also the Detroit Lions got better. If you look at the draft picks, they basically haven't missed over the past few years. And if they have, it's been the picks that you can miss on, like the 6th or 7th round. But they're picking up guys like Rodrigo in the 5th round. They're having guys like Derek Barnes come on in their 3rd or 4th year and really make an impact. And also, this team's still really young. I mean, if Sam Laporta, he's going to be way hungrier this year. Jamison Williams, I haven't even played a whole season yet. And year 2, Jahmyr Gibbs, Aiden Hutchinson wanting to go for Defensive Player of the Year. Oh, yeah. And we addressed the secondary in the offseason. Let's go.
I agree. I think of any team in the NFC that's more of a lock to make it. I think it's them, and then the next team that I'm going to mention. I think those two are the biggest locks. Their division got a lot harder. I think the Bears got a lot better, and so the Packers did too. But the Lions, I think we could see in that division potentially 3 teams make the playoffs there. Which brings me to my next team, Green Bay Packers. We saw them annihilate the Cowboys. Saw them put up a good fight against the Niners. Almost saw Packers Lions in the NFC title game. Packers, yes, no, maybe they make the playoffs.
Yeah, strong maybe for the Packers. I definitely think they'll make it back to the playoffs, but it's a maybe when you're playing in a division with Caleb Williams and the Detroit Lions there. I mean, these are 2 teams that could be Super Bowl contenders, and I think the Packers are right there. But when you're in a division that tough, and it's the 2nd year from Jordan Love, he performed, had a really good end to the season, but he also just got a lot of money. So is he going to take his money and sit on it? Or is he going to come out even better than we saw him last season? We'll see. You
That's
never
fair.
know.
Well, 2 teams to go. 49ers, NFC playoffs. Yes, no, maybe.
No.
I'm actually really glad you said no, because nobody in the NFL is going to have the guts to say it. I agree. I think the 49ers are in trouble. Christian McCaffrey already got hurt. Trent Williams wants a contract. There's blood in the air there. They have a Super Bowl hangover, a Madden curse, and a Kyle Shanahan hangover as well entering into the season. But nobody's going to say it. I do think the 49ers are in trouble. Plus, the Seahawks got better. Plus, the Cardinals got better. Plus, the Rams were already down your necks last year. I do think the 49ers are going to miss the playoffs.
Yeah. No, this season for the 49ers is going to be absolutely brutal the year after they lost the Super Bowl. It was an absolute massacre with the injuries. And then think about this. George Kittle is someone who's in and out of the lineups. He was someone who was hurt after that Super Bowl. You have players like Nick Bosa, who was hurt, I believe. Fred Warner also got hurt. And then you have a new defensive coordinator on that team. And Kyle Shanahan's voice is getting a little bit old now because we made it to 2 Super Bowls, but we haven't been able to get the job done. And now you have a situation where every single player on your team is at risk, and there's a little bit of liability in the air with someone like Brandon Ayuk, who really wanted to be traded and wanted a new contract, but found out the grass wasn't as green as he thought. On the other side, now he's coming back into the locker room. Debo Samuel is another year older. I mean, they're making Debo play running back, tight end, and wide receiver when you already have George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey, who are two of the best running backs and wide receivers. So they put a ton of mileage on his body. So unless they had a great draft this year, I actually think the 49ers are in trouble, because usually the team that loses the Super Bowl has a pretty big meltdown the next year, unless it's the Cincinnati Bengals. That was a outlier over most years, still getting back to the conference championships. And if you could argue a call or two goes their way, maybe an injury or two goes their way, they're right back in the Super Bowl. But that's not the norm unless it's a team like the Bengals or a team like the Patriots. But with the 49ers, I expect a hard crash after a Super Bowl loss, because it happened the last time. What's the difference this time? Brock Purdy? Like, no one's talking about how the 49ers could have a Super Bowl hangover. It's like, oh, is their window getting wider or smaller? We don't know. We just all love the 49ers.
I'm looking at their team right now. I just pulled up their depth chart. Christian McCaffrey's questionable. Jawan Jennings is questionable. Brandon Ayuk requested a trade. We still have to figure that situation out. Are we going to pay him or are we not? Debo Samuel has been hurt the last few years. George Kittle is entering year 31. He'll be 31 in week 3. And
Year
then
31 of life.
Yeah, year 31 of life, not necessarily. He's not year 31 in the NFL. And then you also have Trey Greenlaw, who's questionable, Fred Warner, who's questionable, Leonard Floyd, who's questionable, and Hufanga, who is also questionable, entering week 1. Already, we haven't even played a game yet. We played the preseason, but San Francisco, a lot of worries there. I think that I would buy their under if we're doing the over-unders there. So Niners, I do think they're going to be out.
Yeah, their division 2 is probably sick of them the past few years. And with the 49ers too, it's Kyle Shanahan. You'll see a record like, oh, look how good he is against Sean McVay. Unless it matters in the playoffs, then he loses.
Exactly. Last team in the NFC, Dallas Cowboys.
Hard
Yes,
no.
no, maybe.
Absolute pass. I mean, you're the Cowboys. You are this team that's, oh yeah. I mean, it wasn't a bad loss to the San Francisco 49ers. Like, I don't know why they're taking it so personally, even though when we're trying to step up to be their rival, they want to crush all expectations. They're sick of hearing about the Dallas Cowboys. The San Francisco 49ers and the Cowboys are one of the most historic rivalries in the NFC. They get their ass kicked and they're like, oh, Micah Parsons, I don't know why this is so personal. And then you're thinking you're the 49ers equal, entering the playoffs, and you lose to the youngest team to ever make the NFL playoffs. You didn't just lose to them, though. You get absolutely annihilated. And then Tony Pollard goes on his way. Like, okay, Tony Pollard, the running back that everyone says, yeah, nice running back, solid running back. He's gone. He's on the Titans now. What do we do to replace him? Yeah, exactly. That's what they did to replace him. And then Mike McCarthy going up against the team that fired him. What motivation does he give to his team? Do they fight for him? No. Huge red flag there in Jerry Jones. My nacho buddy, Mike McCarthy, come back next season. You'll be our head coach. We'll have Dak Prescott, re-sign CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, and we'll run it out there with 9 guys on each side, because those 3 guys will take up our entire salary cap. I mean, why is there optimism for the Cowboys? Any
They
reason.
signed CeeDee Lamb. They got that problem solved. So that's cool. I agree though. I mean, their defense still should be solid. But their running game is going to be worse. I don't love their tight ends. And outside of CeeDee Lamb, we have Brandon Cooks, who is an old 30. Let's be honest. I mean, by week 3 or 4, he's going to be turning 31. And he's played. He was drafted in 2014. He's in year 10. He's not really the Brandon Cooks that we know and love from the Saints or the Rams or the Patriots or every other fucking team he's played for. If I were to look at this NFC picture, we mentioned 7 teams. I think the teams that are most likely to miss the playoffs are the Bucks, the Cowboys, and the 49ers. I think the Eagles I have my concerns with. I think the Rams are a lock, the Packers are a lock, and Packers are a maybe, and then the Lions are a must as well. And I have a couple. We'll go over each team and which teams I'm high on afterwards. But NFC, does that sound about right? Teams that you feel are most likely to be in the out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we could see 3 teams from the NFC North make the playoffs next
Agreed.
year, and
Agreed.
probably another one from the West.
Yeah, potentially. Then we go over the AFC. Let's get the easiest one out of the way. The Chiefs. They're going to make it. Obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
That's 100%. That's a log. We'll get that out of the way. The Ravens. Yes, no, maybe.
The Ravens are always a maybe, because you never know what's going to happen in the AFC North. The AFC North is one of the weirdest divisions to predict, because you have the 2 best teams relying on 2 quarterbacks with health issues. That's your first problem. And then the Ravens will just have periods of time where they just don't look like they're into the game, and then they don't look like an elite team, and then they'll look like the best team in the world. So it depends on Lamar. So if Lamar fully healthy, yes, I pick them to make the playoffs, but they're always a maybe for me.
That's fair. I think they're close to a lock. Not quite the same lock as the Chiefs. If everyone's healthy, I think they have the 3rd best roster in the AFC. Outside of another team, which I think is the clear lock because they got way better on both sides of the ball, Houston Texans. You're literally wearing their jersey. Yes, no, maybe that they're a lock, a maybe, or no for making the playoffs.
Yeah, so Texans are definitely a lock if CJ Stroud stays healthy. Like a team like the Chiefs, I can say absolute lock, even if Patrick Mahomes gets hurt, but 100% CJ Stroud is healthy. Texans are making the playoffs and probably the number 1 seed, win all the awards, take it home. You got Daniil Hunter, Stephon Diggs. Texans are looking pretty good right now in a rebuilding division.
Absolutely. I think that the division is theirs. Then the rest of the teams get a lot more questionable. Let's get the biggest team out of the way. Buffalo Bills. They lost their whole defense. They lost Stephon Diggs, but they did draft Keon Coleman. The Bills. Yes, no, maybe they make the playoffs next year.
Hell no. This is going to be the first year where you see the Bills. It's 2008 and the Bills are the stock market. That's what's going to happen to the Bills this year. Complete liquidation, complete meltdown. And if you want a reason why, I don't know. We're in a playoff game at home for the first time. It's on our turf versus the Kansas City Chiefs. We have a chance to drive the ball down the field and get a game tying or leading score. You know what the Buffalo Bills decide to do? Let's run a fake punt with the guy who hasn't played because he almost died on the field last year. Let's run a fake punt with him. And it's not 1 yard. It's not 2 yards. It's 5. And that's the play you run to beat your biggest rival. And then you miss the kick. And your entire team went south this offseason. They went to the Miami Dolphins, but your defense is gone now. And now you just have an old Von Miller. He's your only real difference maker. And then Stephon Diggs out of there, hauling ass out of there. Gabe Davis doesn't want to be there anymore. And now you're relying on that at wide receiver. Exactly. No one knows who's going to play wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. They'll be like, oh yeah, this rookie this year could make a huge difference. I bet he will, but at the same time, Josh Allen loses you games sometimes. And you don't have Stephon Diggs or Gabe Davis there anymore, and you haven't been able to consistently run the ball. I just think the Buffalo Bills are in for their final rude awakening, and Sean McDermott is out of there at the end of the season. It's time. I mean, how
Okay.
long do we have to do this?
I could use reverse psychology. They did. I don't trust the receivers, but they did draft a guy. See how he pans out. First round pick. James Cook looked good at the end of the season. And Josh Allen is, to many, a top 5 quarterback in the league. Can he elevate his team to still make the playoffs as a wild card potentially if he's in that same echelon? So you think he's got the moxie to do it?
No, he loses his team too many games. I mean, he had Stephon Diggs before. He had Gabe Davis before, and maybe not having a Stephon Diggs there, he won't force the ball as much, but it doesn't change his personality. And we also can't ignore the fact that Josh Allen has gotten worse every single year that Brian Daboll has been away from him.
That's
Like
true.
his numbers have been worse every single year that Brian Daboll hasn't been there. His turnovers have gone up. He's making more errant throws, and he's not the same Josh Allen without Brian Daboll.
The numbers do back that up. He had 18 picks last year. He had 14 picks the year before, and he's had completions going down, as well as sacks. So, I mean, a couple of games last year he did genuinely lose for them. The Jets' very first game is a prime example.
4 turnovers.
The Vikings game, they fumbled it with 40 seconds left, and then he threw a pick to seal the game in overtime. Plenty of examples there. I put the Bills as a maybe because
The
I do think that.
Broncos game 2. You lost to Russell Wilson on
Yes,
national
Broncos.
TV.
Yeah, which is why it's crazy that he finished 5th in the MVP, but that's a whole nother story. I put the Bills as a maybe. I'll give them some credibility to some extent, but I'm a lot more nervous than the other 3 teams we mentioned. Then we have the Dolphins. They're in the driver's seat. We're talking about the Bills team that are in rebuild. The only other team in that division that you'll be competing against is the Jets. Dolphins, yes, no, maybe, makes the playoffs.
Unfortunately, yes. They'll make it. They'll be a first-round outage. I just don't know with the Jets. There's too many question marks because they're trading for players that want a new contract. They know that, and then they're like, "Oh, we're not going to pay you a new contract or trade you." That's a huge red flag for me. And then I just don't know what Aaron Rodgers is going to be next year. So I think Miami is going to be in a division with 3 teams that will possibly have a losing record for their trajectory. That works out perfectly for them. And with Drake May, I think the Patriots can be competitive, but I still think Miami has one more year of being one of the top dogs in that division and making the playoffs, and then they'll probably fall apart next
I
year.
think that's fair.
But not this year.
Yeah. And then we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. They replaced Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. So replaced bad quarterbacks with quarterbacks who have something to prove. Steelers, yes, no, maybe they make the playoffs.
I mean, they'll have a winning record. Will that translate to them making the playoffs? I don't know. Like every year we play the game with the Steelers, like, is this the year they have a losing record? If it wasn't last year with a first round quarterback who doesn't understand the concept of getting the ball in the end zone, like Kenny Pickett, if you asked him what a touchdown means, what a touchdown is, he probably wouldn't know. And then he was too embarrassed that they brought in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields to compete with him. And you had Mason Rudolph, the guy who thought it was a good idea to square up to Myles Garrett. So if the IQ in that quarterback room can make the playoffs and have a winning record, I can't pick against the Steelers when you have Russ, who was actually pretty decent, okay last year. So will they make the playoffs? Maybe ish, but will they have a winning record? I can't say no at this point. Mike Tomlin is working some kind of magic, or he has some sort of spell on the NFL. That
That's
record.
true. And they did get Patrick Queen, who's a massive addition, stole that from the Ravens. They do also have, I mean, let's see if they end up getting Brandon Ayuk at some point. They were in talks with him as well. So George Pickens, we like George Pickens, running backs. Let's see if the new offensive coordinator can bring them to the promised land. I think
Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I think they'll miss the playoffs, but I do think the 9-8 will stand tall. There's a couple other teams that I'm a little higher on. And then the Browns to end it off. We got some Flacco magic. Went on an absolutely insanity run to bring them to the playoffs. Finished 11-6, best season the Browns have had, arguably ever. The Browns, will they make the playoffs?
Uh, Again, maybe ish. Same with the Steelers. With the Browns, it's tough because it's a situation where you don't know what Deshaun Watson's going to be. And I really don't think Deshaun Watson cares that much about football anymore and probably doesn't want to be in the limelight because the more he's in the limelight, the more people remind him of the scandal he was involved in. And he already got fully guaranteed money. So I just don't know with the Browns, but they're a team. Okay. Could they be 11-7? Sure. Could they also be 7-11? Yeah. Or 6-11, 11-6.
Yeah. I
Probably
think
not,
that
though.
I think that the Bengals will probably steal the Brown spot. And then for the Bills, a couple other teams will go through when we go through just every team. Um, whether it's a team like the Raiders who could be competitive, the Colts, I guess the Jags. I'm not going to say the Chargers quite yet, but I think there's enough teams that could steal the Browns and Steelers spot for me to say that convince, or even the Bills potentially. I think there's enough people that I think we can see two new playoff teams in the AFC, and then at least three in the NFC. So I think we could see, I think 6-7's fair this upcoming year.
Yeah, 6-7, I think is fair. I want to see the Colts in there. Think they can definitely make the playoffs, and maybe a team like the Jets or a team like the maybe the Jaguars figure it out. Tennessee, you never know. So
Yeah. So I want to quickly run through each team. We've gone. I'll skip the playoff teams we've already gone over, but I'll say the team. We'll go through each division. Give me your thoughts one last final time before the season starts next week. Next week we're going to go through the games and give our predictions for each game. But we'll go through the quick snapshot of each team. We talked about them a second ago. Our thoughts on the Jets. Final feeling for the Jets after everything in the offseason. How do we feel about the Jets?
for me, the Jets are just cloudy at this point. I think if Aaron Rodgers comes back and is himself, you're going to be looking at a team that is probably going to win their division, has a great defense, and he'll be that calming presence that they've been missing. But at the end of the day, the Jets are still the Jets. And until they prove me otherwise, this is not a team that you want to be the hot commodity, picking them every single year to be good. This is a team that every single year will find a way to disappoint and break your heart. And at the end of the day, when you think of Aaron Rodgers, he's someone who has perpetually underperformed in the playoffs and for the first time lost to the Lions 2 times in a row. You know the time he did that? Oh yeah, when it mattered the most, when it was the game to decide whether or not they would be in the playoffs, and he got sent home early by the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I personally think the Jets they run me a lot of the 22 Packers, except for I think the defense is better this time around, but their weapons don't amaze me. I mean, we have Garrett Wilson, who I like a lot. Mike Williams is always hurt. You have an old offensive line, and you have a defense that's really good, but there's already noise in the locker room. There was questions about Robert Saleh last year. It was Zach Wilson. Now Hassan Riddick is demanding a contract who you traded for. We've gone over this before, but that's the dumbest thing ever. I think the Jets are just chemistry-wise a mess. I'm not betting on the Jets to make it. I think they go like 8-9. They'll be competitive, but even Aaron Rodgers, like he's going to be 41 this year. I think it's easier for me to bet against him, so I'm going to have them at like 8-9. They'll be competitive, but I can't pick them. I can't be high on them for that reason.
No.
Patriots. Thoughts on the Patriots?
Sneaky good. I think the Patriots are getting a bad rap right now. There's a lot of chats that were making fun of Juju Smith-Schuster for being cut from the worst roster in the NFL, where I really don't think that's fair. I think Drake May is actually going to be pretty good for them. It's a new era in New England, and I think Drake May is going to be better than Mac Jones, and they will struggle at first, but I think at the end of the year, they're going to ruin someone's day that's trying to make the playoffs, needs a win, and then feeling good about myself, overlook the Patriots, and then just get their heart ripped out. So I think they're going to be sneaky good. Will they make the playoffs? No, not there yet, but a dark horse better than average team.
Yeah, I mean they face at the end of the season they face the Cardinals, the Colts. If Anthony Richardson gets banged up again, they'll have the Colts. They face the Chargers. They face the Bills twice. So I think you think they'll win more than their games they won last year. You think they'll outperform 4 wins?
Yeah, they'll outperform 4 wins. And I think you mentioned the exact team whose heart they're probably going to crush, and that's the Chargers. I mean, the Chargers feeling good about themselves, climbing up, creeping up on the wild card spot, and then boom, Patriots ruin their day. Most Chargers thing to happen. So calling it right now.
Well, it's funny you say that because the Chargers actually face them in Week 17. So
Hmm.
you might have that crystal ball there. Gives me a good. I mean, we already talked about the Bills. You're very low on the Bills. I think the Bills. I think their ceiling is like 9-8. I think their floor is 7-10. I think we're
You
not
think
high on
their
the
floor is
Bills.
7-10?
I mean, they still have Josh Allen. Like, I don't think they're going to be terrible, but they're not going to be like 4-13 unless if he gets hurt. I don't think they're going to be that bad. They're not going to be like the Panthers and Patriots bad. I think that's fair. But I do think that they could miss the playoffs, and their defense could be much worse. Their offense could also be much worse. So I think 7-10 is fair at worst for them.
7-10. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll see.
I think I'm going to put them. I think they're going to be 8-9 as well. I think them and the Jets will be competing. I don't think they wouldn't make the playoffs though, unless if Josh Allen like proves that he's an MVP caliber player. This is like the ultimate year. We've been doubting Josh Allen forever. At least our show has. We've had our questions for him. If Josh Allen wants to prove to me that he's the MVP, then this is the year he can win MVP. If he's not, then I don't want to ever hear him in the top 5 again. So this is his year. Josh Allen proves me wrong. I'll say that I'm wrong, but I think that this is his year to prove it if he is that
So
guy.
we've never we've never doubted Josh Allen on this show. On this show, we've just been realistic about who Josh Allen is, who's a quarterback who can lose you games, who is probably a top 5 quarterback, at least talent wise, with the arm strength and how he can run the ball. But we see a trend with his turnovers, not being able to get over the hump, not being able to stand up to Mahomes the same way Joe Burrow has. He's never had his Macaulay Culkin moment in Home Alone and come out and said, I'm not afraid anymore. He just hasn't done that, but the media just tried to make him Patrick Mahomes equal, which is really our problem with him. But he's never had his Burrow moment where he's looked Patrick Mahomes in the eyes and said, I'm not afraid anymore. No, he's just crumbled and turned the ball over.
And he also hasn't won the MVPs that Lamar has.
No,
So he's had his playoff wins, but they're against like Skylar Thompson and Mac Jones. And he had a couple of meltdowns. He had the meltdown against the Bengals. He's gone toe to toe with Mahomes, but he hasn't won those games. So it's like, what does that really mean at the end of the day? So we have our
and he almost
questions.
lost to Phillip Rivers
Yeah.
on the Colts.
Yeah. He's had a lot of ugly games. Let's be honest. So Josh Allen, this is his year. If he's the guy, he's the guy. And I hope he is. I'd rather him be than him not be, but
Yeah, it's
this
good
is
for
his
the
year.
league.
He's got to
It's good
prove
for
it.
the league.
Let's go to the AFC West. We're going to skip the Chiefs. We think the Chiefs are going to be, if they're not the AFC champions, they'll be at least in the AFC title game. We're going to skip the Chiefs. I think that's just for time's sake. Let's not waste our time. But we talked about them a second ago. The Chargers. I think we have slightly different sentiments on the Chargers. Your Chargers opinion, final opinion for the Chargers going into the season.
Just stop with the Chargers. I don't want to hear about them until they win a playoff game. I mean, with the Chargers, my opinion on them is just stop. I mean, just move out of LA. Stop trying to be the Chargers. Stop trying to be an imposter in LA. The Rams got there and won a Super Bowl. They beat you out. You're officially the Clippers now. And then you lost to Trevor Lawrence, who had 4 turnovers in the first half, and somehow you found a way to lose that game. And then you have Brandon Staley on that team. Not a huge believer in them until I see them do anything, but this is still a cursed franchise. So they need to do whatever Dan Campbell did with the Lions, whether he traveled to Tibet, hiked up a mountain, and talked to a monk on how to fix the Lions. That's exactly what the Chargers need to do. So until then, just stop.
I think If anybody can help the Chargers, I'm going to give Jim Harbaugh some flowers. I don't think they're going to be as bad as you say they're going to be. I think their defense, they have a decent enough roster where I think that they can be competitive. I still think they have a lot of fixes. Like their cornerbacks are old. Like they have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. We like Asante Samuel Jr., Derwin James, but their defense, I don't trust their pass rush very much. And then their offensive line got better, but they also got way worse because they cut both of their best wide receivers. And now they're left with, I like Lad McConkey, but he's a rookie. I can't bet my stock on him. They have DJ Chark, nice receiver, but they're not there. They're not a playoff team yet. So I think 7-10 is a fair record for the Chargers. They'll be better than last year, but they're not going to be a playoff team.
Yeah. And my problem with them is not necessarily that they're going to be really bad. It's just that they always fall apart at the worst possible moment.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say the Chargers are going to be right in the mix. And then that Patriots game, who do they never beat? I want to know the Patriots record against the Chargers because the Chargers never beat the Patriots. It's
I think
like
they
death and taxes.
destroyed them in the Mac Jones, like Cam Newton era. I think Bill
They did.
Belichick got the better of them.
Let's look. Patriots all time are 27-16. And a lot of those losses came like in the 70s. But if you cut out those losses in the 70s, we're looking at a much different game. Since 1973, the Patriots have lost to the Chargers 4 times. I'll repeat
Since
that.
1973.
Since 1973,
Jesus.
the Chargers have lost to the Chargers. The Patriots have lost to the Chargers 4 times.
And
They
that's
don't win.
with Mac Jones.
That is correct. And keep in mind that last year they beat the Patriots 6-0 with Justin Herbert. So, not looking great. Last time they beat them before that was 2008. Before that, it was 2005 and 2002. And then after that, Patriots won every single game up until November 15th of 1970 when the Chargers won 16-14 in the most 1970s score possible. So,
It's time for them to leave LA.
Time for them to go to they can go to Austin, they can go to San Diego. They can leave just California at large. They have not been kind to them. Raiders, Las Vegas. Final sentiment on the Raiders. I have a Madden franchise, so I might be swayed a little bit on the Raiders a little bit.
Yeah, outside of a video game, I would say tough with the Raiders, and I think they're going to be a tough out here. Potential threat to make the playoffs, but not necessarily the lock. But I do like that they're starting Gardner Minshew. I think he's definitely better than Aiden O'Connell, and I like the direction that Antonio Pierce is steering the ship, and then also the addition of Brock Bowers is going to be massive for this team. You don't have Josh Jacobs anymore, but you should hopefully be able to make up for that with a new running back and with production at tight end, at wide receiver with Devontae Adams there. And then we'll see if they get the better end of the deal with Josh Jacobs. But I think definitely toughness with the Raiders and dark horse playoff team. Maybe if they get the right matchup, they win a playoff game at best.
Yeah.
But outside of that, they're not going anywhere past the divisional round.
I think the Raiders can make the playoffs. I feel pretty high on them because they have a good receiver core. I was super high on Brock Bowers before the draft, and last year I was high on Michael Mayer, who they ended up getting. So they have great offensive talent. And on the other side, I like Christian Wilkins. Max Crosby could be defensive player of the year this year. And then I like some of their other players that maybe not a lot of people know, like Bobby Spillane. I think is a nice addition. I think he could be really solid. And then really it's their secondary that will have the question marks. But I think the Raiders, I think 9-8 is fair for them. I think that they're going to be a competitive team for them. So I believe in the Raiders. Last year they were 8-9. I think 9-8 is totally fair.
Yeah, and outside the Chiefs, they should be in a pretty weak division. So I definitely think they'll be number 2. And No, you've been introducing, doing a great job, asking about how I feel about these various teams. But I want to ask you, give you the floor right away. How do you feel about the Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, now that Bailey Zappi, or now that Jarrett Stidham get the starting job? How do you feel about that quarterback room and Sean Payton post having the worst dead cap in NFL history?
I don't believe in the Broncos. I understand that Bo Nix looked good in the preseason. Are you really supposed to make me believe in a quarterback because of how well they did in the preseason? Look, Bo Nix might have swayed me slightly. Like I might be a little bit higher on him than I was before, but I don't believe in the Broncos because let's look at their talent, right? They have Cortland Sutton, who's a very nice receiver. I shouldn't shit on Cortland Sutton. He's a fine receiver, been very solid. But let's look at the rest of their wide receivers. Their number 2 wide receiver was the number 4 wide receiver for the Lions the last several years, Josh Reynolds. We like Josh Reynolds. No disrespect to Josh Reynolds. Why is he your number 2? Marvin Mims is your 3rd wide receiver. Like Marvin Mims, why is he your 3rd? Your offensive line, we still have your questions there. Your tight end is easily the worst tight end in that division. You have Brock Bowers, Travis Kelce, and the Chargers, I believe, might still have Gerald Everett. So like you have the worst tight end, you have the worst receivers, even over the the Chargers receivers are better than that. And then your defense, it's Pat Surtain and like DJ Jones. I know they got Zach Allen, but like I don't love the Broncos defense either. I don't trust. I think people are starting to lose faith in Sean Payton. That last year was a mess. I think the Broncos are still going to finish last. Do I think they're going to be 1-16 bad? No. But 5-11, yeah. 5-12, Broncos are still going to be the worst team in that division, I think.
Yeah, and people are acting like Sean Payton is this wizard rebuilding teams because he got lucky picking up Drew Brees because people didn't believe in him because he got injured. And then he gets Drew Brees there, and then he gets to a Super Bowl. And then turns out that the only reason they got to the Super Bowl was because Greg Williams and Sean Payton decided, hey, maybe if we hurt players on the opposition, that would give us a better chance to win. So he does that, and then after the Saints win the Super Bowl, they're bad for a while and never got back to a Super Bowl when he had Drew Brees throughout the entirety of his prime. And that was with Drew Brees, who was a perennial top 5, if not top 3 quarterback. You had Brady, you had Rodgers, then it would be the rotation. Is it Brees? Is it Ben? Is it Cam Newton? Is it Eli Manning when he goes to the Super Bowl this year? But he only got to the Super Bowl once. And then you're going to convince me that he's going to make it to the playoffs or turn it around with Bo Nix because the preseason? No. It's time to hop into your Johnny Cash back here. As he would say, I won't back down on the Broncos. I won't back down on Bo Nix here. He's not that answer. The fact that people had the audacity to say that Bo Nix was the best quarterback in the draft already, okay, I don't know. Maybe if you're 25 years old and stayed in college 7 more years than everybody else, oh, yeah, you look more like a pro because you took 7 extra years than every other quarterback in the draft. Of course you look better than Caleb Williams. Oh, wait, no, you didn't because you're not throwing off shoulder in the bucket going left. Like, no, he's not the best quarterback in the draft. And we saw this exact same scenario play out with Kenny Pickett. You know what the Steelers had that the Broncos didn't last year? TJ Watt on defense, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Fryermuth, 2 solid running backs, and Mike Tomlin at head coach coaching up the defense and not having a losing record. And they did that all with Kenny Pickett. And you're convincing me that Bo Nix and just Cortland Sutton in a running back with injury history is going to somehow magically turn around the Broncos this year. I don't buy it.
I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid on them. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. And we're honest people on the show. We've proven that time again. If we're wrong, we'll admit it. But I don't think we're going to be wrong about the Broncos. It's the preseason, guys. Relax, please. So that in mind, I want to pivot to the AFC South because there's one team that I'm super high on. The rest of the teams I have my questions on. So let's get the best one out of the way. The Texans. I'll give my sentiment on the Texans. I think the team that has the highest chance of beating the Chiefs this upcoming year is the Texans. If you look at their team, they are absolutely the Super Bowl team. They have a good running back. They have great wide receivers. They have a good tight end, offensive line they've been working on. Their defense got a lot better. They got Daniil Hunter. Will Anderson's a year older, so he'll be even better. I don't think their secondary is that much of a question anymore either. They're a complete team. And D'Amico Ryans is really solid. I think CJ Stroud can take another stride. I think the Texans could be the 1 seed this year. And I believe that we're going to see some awards handed out to the Texans in a few different means. We'll go over that later. I think the Texans, I think they're the biggest threat to the Chiefs going into the season. I'm very high on the Texans.
Yeah, and I think they're definitely a threat to the Chiefs. Not ready to put them ahead of the Bengals yet because the Bengals have gone out there. They've done it. They're not going to be mesmerized about Patrick Mahomes like the Texans maybe if they run into them. But with everything you said there, the thing I'll add to it too is there was a scary moment for the NFL this offseason. Many people say it was when the Texans got Stephon Diggs, when they already had two really good wide receivers, and we saw how CJ Stroud came alive, connecting with his receivers in the playoffs, and Tank Dell is going to be coming back, picking up Daniil Hunter and Joe Mixon. But there was one guy everyone is after, and they thought he was such a good coordinator that he should be the head coach of maybe the
True.
Titans, maybe the Falcons. Bobby Slowick coming back for the Texans, building upon what they did last year with CJ Stroud is going to be the difference maker. It's like when Ben Johnson came back to Detroit, and you know why he came back? Because there's unfinished business with the Houston Texans. Some people want to get out there, be a head coach. He's like, maybe I'm young. Maybe I don't want to be a head coach. Maybe I want to refine all of my tools as a coordinator and get to a Super Bowl and do something that Kyle Shanahan doesn't do when he gets to a Super Bowl. And that's win and hold that over his head. And then D'Amico Ryans can also hold that over Kyle Shanahan's head. So I think this team is going to be motivated, and you already have people overlooking them this year where like the Texans were good last year, but we don't think they're going to be that much better. We don't think CJ Stroud's going to have top 5 numbers as a quarterback when he really didn't have a number 1 receiver last year. Now he does, and now Will Anderson also has a buddy that he can go after the quarterback with. So I think they're going to be even better. And I think top 3 teams in the AFC this year for sure, right there with the Bengals if they're healthy, and the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable putting them above the Bengals only because I think their roster is slightly better right now. But they remind me a lot of the Lions last year, like you mentioned with Bobby Slowick, and they remind me of that Bengals team. Like really bad for a long time. They get their quarterback, and then they make a big move and ultimately propel themselves into the stratosphere. I think the Texans, at worst, is the 3rd best team in the AFC, and I do think that I feel confident putting them is right up there with the Chiefs. But I do think that they'll have to prove it. But I am high on them nonetheless.
What do you think of the Jaguars this
I
season?
don't I don't trust the Jaguars. I can't anymore. Do I see like Trevor Lawrence is just one of those people that I've heard so much and I've seen it enough, but they are easily the most frustrating team. And I don't think they did anything overwhelming in the offseason that's going to change my mind. Your number 1, Christian Kirk. We love Christian Kirk. I don't trust it. Gabe Davis. I don't trust it. They drafted Brian Thomas Jr., who's getting a lot of buzz. I got to see it first. I just don't think this team has any moxie. That's the thing. And their defense does nothing for me. You have a massive bust at right edge with Trayvon Walker. And then it's like you drafted, you signed Darnell Savage, Arik Armstead. I don't, other than that, it's like, I don't care. Like this team is just average as it gets. I just want to see them actually do it. Do I think they have the talent to? Trevor Lawrence certainly does. Travis Etienne does, but the rest of this team just doesn't have any moxie. I don't trust them. I think they're going to be the 3rd or maybe the 4th best team in that division.
Yeah. And the first thing that comes to mind with this team is I just think they're timid. With Trevor Lawrence, he doesn't really give this team the Ooh, the Jaguars are scary feel. When you had people like Nick Wright talking about Trevor Lawrence ascending, it was a lot of TD to pick ratio, but it wasn't a lot of wow, scary, I'm terrified of this team football. And Doug Peterson got to a Super Bowl and won it. He's a Super Bowl winning head coach, but he hasn't had the impact on the entire team that you would like. They haven't quite reached that next level. So I still think there is a little bit in there of them being able to get to the next level. But at the same time, when you watch Trevor Lawrence against the Ravens on Sunday Night Football, just running and then he fumbles the ball for no reason and he just has these bizarre turnovers sometimes. It's like, okay, still have my question marks. You have similar numbers to Daniel Jones. You had a stretch where you played well for half a season and you were the number one pick at Clemson and everyone said you were football Jesus and that still carried you to a contract that was way too much money and he hadn't earned yet. Like they paid their quarterback way too much money, so then that could be a contract that kills them. So if they don't do anything this year, I think they're done.
I also think the Jags have been one of the worst organizations throughout the last 25 years. And so this is the same team that just 3 years ago was trying to make it Urban Meyerville down in Jacksonville. So I still can't get that out of my brain. And they did get Doug Peterson, who I know obviously he did win that Super Bowl with Nick Foles, but he needs to prove that that wasn't just a Cinderella story and that it was actually like he's a great head coach. I like Doug Peterson as a coach, but this is the year again, similar to like the Bills. It's the prove it year. The Jags can't prove it this year. Then they've just proven that they're a bad organization and they can't. They're just a complete mess to go to. I don't believe in the Jags. I think they could finish at worst fourth in the division, but at best, I still think they're like the third best team in that division.
Yeah. And you still don't have fans, so there's that too.
And you don't have fans either. You're even worse. But then that brings me to the Colts, who I think the Colts are an interesting team. They're a team I can't quite put my pulse on because I really like Shane Steichen. Anthony Richardson's a very interesting prospect. He got hurt last year. The Colts, last year they went 9-8 with Gardner Minshew. Obviously, you get Anthony Richardson back, who so much potential. And then we have players like Josh Downs, who's going to be a year older. Michael Pittman, who was already good. Alec Pierce is another player who's really solid. Jonathan Taylor, one of the best running backs in football. And then defensively, they have a pretty stacked defense too. Colts, I think they're a team that I think will make the playoffs next year.
Yeah, and I think the Colts have the most untapped potential to be really bad or really good next year. And I think the Colts are going to be a dark horse contender. And next year, if they are what they're supposed to be, I wouldn't be surprised if they made the Super Bowl, to be honest. And I think with Shane Steichen, with Anthony Richardson, that's what he did with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. And if you get Shane Steichen in full effect, and who's his mentor this season? Who's the guy holding the clipboard with them? Who's the guy teaching him how to be a pro this season? Who's the guy with him teaching him the offense and coaching him how not to get hurt and through situations? Oh, yeah. Super Bowl winning quarterback Joe Flacco. And who's the one that's going to step in if Anthony Richardson gets hurt? Are we going to get a Flacco Cinderella story part 2? I think we could. And could he get his revenge on the Houston Texans last year for them knocking him out of the playoffs? Yeah, I think we could, because I think the Colts have better overall weapons than the Browns did at that time. And I think the Colts are also an organization ready to take that next step, especially with Shane Steichen last year. He was someone who missed the playoffs, but he was still in the running for a Coach of the Year candidate with how much he did just with Gardner Minshew and almost making the playoffs when everyone wrote them off. And they were also a participant in last year's Game of the Year against the Cleveland Browns. So I think their ceiling is in the Super Bowl and their floor is they could almost miss the playoffs, but I think they have the biggest range of potential in either direction of any NFL team.
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to Anthony Richardson. I believe in his athleticism, his arm. I want him to be a little bit more accurate, but I think he kind of I mean, he's had the Cam Newton comparison. I think that that's pretty on the nose, to be honest. Big physical. He's got a similar build to Cam Newton. Obviously, he's got the running upside, but the accuracy. He's got a. If he can be accurate, if he can be healthy, then I think this Colts team could be really good. But it really comes down to his health, and I think I can put the Colts in the playoffs comfortably. But ultimately, it comes down to how good Anthony Richardson is in
Still
general.
got Flacco though.
They still got Flacco. Then the last team in that division, a team that a lot of people are projecting to go last in the division, but for some reason I feel some optimism with the Titans. Will Levis, another guy kind of banking on whether or not he'll be good or not for the Titans. But if you look at them, if they are good, Calvin Ridley, D-Hop, Tyler Boyd, Tony Pollard, on offensive line they've been doing some upgrades with. And then a defense where we see Quandre Diggs, L'Jarius Sneed. They got Jeffrey Simmons, Sebastian Joseph Day. They got some nice players on defense as well. It's a team that very volatile. I don't think they're going to be the winners of that division, especially because of the Texans. I think their ceiling is the second team, and their floor is absolutely being one of the worst teams in the AFC, depending on how Will Levis is.
Yeah, and it's down to him, and I wouldn't necessarily blame him if he has a bad year just because you're relying on Tony Pollard, who a lot of people like, but I've never been a huge fan of. You're relying on a guy who was pretty underwhelming last year in Calvin Ridley. You're relying on DeAndre Hopkins coming into about his 40th year in the NFL at this point. I mean, he's turning into Larry Fitzgerald and following in his footsteps right now. So, really don't have a huge direction for them. You also have another really old receiver in Tyler Boyd. So, could it work out with Brian Callahan? Yes. Am I more optimistic than most people? I think so. And that's kind of where I'm at with the Titans. Like, I think they'll be better than they should be, but you just never know, especially with the Titans. But I do think a lot of teams will overlook them, and Will Levis will have really high highs, but he's kind of like if you merge Jameis Winston and Ryan Fitzpatrick at this point in his career.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for them, I think they're going to start off pretty sluggish. Like they have the Bears to start, the Jets, who could be good, the Packers, the Dolphins, the Colts, Bills, Lions. But then after that, their second half of the season, I think we're going to see kind of similar to what we saw from the Vikings last year. I think we're going to see they start off pretty sluggish. Maybe they start off 1-4 or 2-5, and then after week 8, you see like the Patriots, the Vikings potentially with Sam Darnold. You have the Commanders, the Jags. We don't know how consistent the Jags will be. You face them twice. I think you could see them rattle off some wins at the end of the season and give them some momentum for next year. So I do think that they're not going to be a playoff team, but I think that entering the next season, we're going to have a lot more optimism in them. So I would say I'm more optimistic than most, but I don't think they're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah. We'll see with Brian Callahan too. Rookie head coach is always tough. So,
Of course. Ravens, I feel like we feel the same about. They should be a playoff. If all is well, their injuries are fine. They should be fine.
I think they'll always have a ceiling of the conference championship, though. I don't think they're going to get to the Super Bowl ever, unless
agree.
Mahomes goes down.
Yeah, I can agree. I think the Ravens will be a very good regular season team, but getting past the Chiefs is going to be extremely hard, especially when Lamar admits that he hates facing them. Then we have the Bengals, who I feel like a lot of people, I think there's a lot of mixed emotions for them. Can they make it back to the Super Bowl from 3 years ago? Joe Burrow's fully healthy now. Jamar Chase has got his contract, and T. Higgins is toughing it out. We got Mike Gesicki on that team, and then their defense, we got Trey Hendrickson, Geno Stone, and some of the other boys that were from that Super Bowl run. The Bengals, how do we feel about them?
Nervous, not going to lie. Definitely nervous about the Bengals, and it's all about the health of Joe Burrow because I think with the Bengals this year, Joe Burrow healthy, no questions asked. I think you can go toe-to-toe with the Chiefs, get to the Super Bowl, and win it, no problem there. However, when two when pretty much every single year Joe Burrow has played, he's dealing with some sort of injury. The year that they lost the Chiefs in the playoffs, he was injured in that conference championship game, injured by the time he got to the Super Bowl, hobbling in there, been sacked more than Andrew Luck was, and you brought that up on the show, how he had accumulated more sacks than Andrew Luck already, and I don't think he's gonna go into architecture like Andrew Luck did. I don't think he's that type of player to leave the NFL because I do think he loves football. Um, but at the same time, I'm nervous this year because if he gets hurt, I just can't. I just can't see him staying healthy throughout his career anymore, and it'll be a sad story, unfortunately.
It would be very sad. I do think he's added a lot of muscle this year. And maybe the hair dye also helped him. Who knows? But for
It
me,
helped Eminem.
it did help Eminem. So I think for me, I believe in their offense. I believe in Joe Burrow, their defense. Um, some of the players from their Super Bowl run are gone, like the Jesse Bates of the world. Um, so I think that I still believe in them to be. I think they should be the top 3 or 4 team in the league. I think they should or can win their division. I think right now I'd put them below the Texans. I'm higher on the Texans right now than the Bengals, just because I believe in CJ Stroud's health more and I believe in the Texans defense more. But I think they should absolutely be one of the contenders in the AFC. So I still believe in them. I think they could make the AFC title game, potentially the Super Bowl.
Yeah, definitely. Hold your breath here for them. If Joe Burrow makes it through this year, okay, everything's cool. We're good, but we'll see.
Of course. And then Browns. Um, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, Nick Chubb will be out for the first 4 games. Amari Cooper, they added Jerry Jeudy. But their defense, which was one of the best defenses last year, um, the Browns, they made the playoffs 11-6. Flockenheimer run. Can they do it again? Is the question.
Yeah, with the Browns, anytime it comes up, it's like, I don't know how. Like, this is the one team where it's like, how are you supposed to make expectations for a team whose coach has more coach of the year victories than playoff wins? I mean, has that ever happened in the NFL where your coach goes 2 years, 2 out of 3 years where he wins coach of the year, brings the Browns to the playoffs, ushers out Ben Roethlisberger, and says, I hate Baker Mayfield so much that I want to trade for a serial predator, offer him the first fully guaranteed contract in NFL history for $230 million. And then he's been inconsistent. He's gotten hurt. We still have not seen the Houston Deshaun Watson yet. And then each year, their defense, is it on? Is it off? We don't know. It seems like bringing in Jim Schwartz was the right decision, but just at the quarterback position now, instead of Flacco, it's going to be Jameis Winston. It, the Browns are the one team who's like, I don't know. Are they going to go 11-6? Not surprising. Maybe surprised if they go 5-12. No, not at all.
I think they have the most low side and the most. I think they have the lowest ceiling and the lowest floor of any of the AFC North teams. Like the Steelers, we hate, but they have a high floor, low ceiling. For Cleveland, Deshaun Watson, it's been 2 years, and I understand he's been kind of banged up. Like he had a suspension, and then last year he got hurt. But like, I don't know. I just feel like at this point, by the time his contract's up, he could just walk out on the sunset and just kind of be forgotten. So I don't think he really cares. And then even if he gets hurt again and it's Jameis Winston, like I don't know. I feel like the last year's run was a lot more like a once in a few generations kind of run with Joe Flacco. I just don't think they can do it again. And like we mentioned with the playoff teams earlier, I think they're the team that could be the lock to miss it, just based on the fact that what we saw last year in their team this year, like I just don't think they got that much better. And I feel like last year's run was a lot more like historic. So for that, I think the Browns will most likely finish last.
Yeah. And I think for the NFL, um, because you have Deshaun Watson there, and I don't think the Browns will succeed with him. And with that being the case, the Browns are kind of a dysfunctional organization. So if you miss the playoffs, have a collapse, do you blame that all on Kevin Stefanski? Well, it's probably not his fault necessarily. The Browns, dysfunctional. We need someone to blame. Probably blame Kevin Stefanski. Bills fall apart this year. Okay, let's swap Kevin Stefanski and Sean McDermott. Let's do that next season. If the Browns and Bills fall apart, let's just swap the two coaches.
That's probably going to happen if that happens. And I like Kevin Stefanski and the Bills way more than Sean McDermott on the Browns. So that'd be interesting to see. We got to go over the last team in the AFC, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think the sigh was necessary. Was it not? They have been one of the most eye-gougingly painful teams to watch the last 3 years, both the last year with Big Ben and then these last 2 years since, with watching them play football. And they're more frustrating than these other teams that have terrible offenses because they still win games each and every year. They still finish 9-8. There's some sort of voodoo curse. The Steelers, final team to talk about in the AFC.
Yeah, and we live in America, we live in a country where if you can go out there and accomplish it, you should be able to go do that as long as you're not harming anyone else. But there's a certain point when your accomplishments start to get in the way of other people, start infringing on other people's rights, start infringing on people's eyes. And if there's ever a team where the NFL steps in and says, I know you qualified for the playoffs, but it's not good for the league to watch Mason Rudolph versus Josh Allen. I think the Steelers were a team last year that the NFL should have just stepped in and said, no, sorry, I know you qualified, but you're not going to make the playoffs this year because the only reason you made the playoffs last year was the Ravens were playing all of their backups last year. If not, it would have been the Indianapolis Colts. And if that's the case, the NFL should be like, okay, you didn't actually beat the Ravens. You beat the Ravens XFL squad. You beat their Canadian team. So I would have swapped out the Colts and the Steelers last year because I thought that would have been a much better game. But for the Steelers, are they going to have a losing season? We have this conversation every single year. No, because last year, if it didn't happen last year, I don't think it'll happen again, but they keep getting back to the playoffs and being painfully bad and painfully awful to watch. So I think it's time for the NFL to step in and say, you're not beating another team's backups to qualify for the playoffs this year. We're going to put this other team in.
Yeah. Last year was the year, but at the same time, I think this year's the year that they finally suck. Because, good Lord, the thing that's so annoying about this team is if you're this team is literally they have a 90 defense or at least an 88 defense. You have so many good players on their defensive side: Alex Highsmith, Patrick Queen, TJ Watt, Joey Porter Jr. There's so many good players on the defensive side of the ball. Then you look on offense, right? How do we feel about Najee Harris at this point? I have believed in this man for so long, and I'm sick of it. Jalen Warren, we like. How long can we believe in him? Cordell Patterson is an ageless anomaly. George Pickens, I know, is really good at football, but for some reason, he hasn't gotten his quite yet. And then the rest of that team, their wide receiver core is terrible. They got rid of Deontay Johnson, which he didn't really play much last year. I know he's banged up a little bit these last few years. But now their number 2 receivers, Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin. And now their QBs, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, who their combined records the last 3 years have been 27 and 57. Their QB records are terrible. Russell Wilson has been a check down merchant, and Justin Fields, Justin Fields can run the ball really well, and I know he can make athletic plays. The problem is he can't throw past 10 yards. So I can't trust either of the quarterbacks. I can't trust Najee Harris because honestly, I think he's a fine running back, but maybe he's not what they said he was in the draft. George Pickens, I can believe with. The rest of that offense, I'm wearing a blindfold when I'm watching them this year. And then their defense, I know their defense is going to be fine. The most frustrating part is after all I've said about how bad their offense is, they're probably still going to be in the playoff hunt, which is the most annoying part about the Steelers, which is why I actually hate the Steelers this time. I didn't hate them in the 2010s with AB and Juju and all these other guys, but this iteration of the Steelers, I want them to get hit by a missile at this point. I hate the Steelers this year. They are
do you
so
want
annoying.
the
It'd be
Dark
so
Knight
much.
Rises to happen where the stadium falls out?
Literally, call up Bane. I want to see it happen. Hines Ward was on that field, so maybe we can ask a favor of the former Steelers. I want the Steelers to be 0-17 this year, and it has nothing to do with the city of Pittsburgh. They've been very kind to me, but I cannot go through another year of this Pittsburgh's abysmal offense resulting in a playoff game. I can't do it. 0-17, Mike Tomlin moves on, goes to another team, and we can get over this god-awful winning record bullshit. Please, for the sake of humanity.
You would hope so, but they did just extend him. The problem with Tomlin, though, is man does not know how to pick an offensive coordinator at all.
It's
Like
painful.
Arthur Smith this year is the number one reason why you're with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's terrible.
And do you think that their offense will be better with an offensive coordinator who has proven to not know how to utilize talent, with two quarterbacks whose winning records, who their winning percentage is in the 30s the last 3 years? Can I believe somebody who their quarterbacks haven't won elsewhere the last 3 years, and then Arthur Smith can't utilize his talent? So the Steelers, please, can we just have a bad record for the Steelers? The Browns don't deserve to finish last again, and the Steelers do. The Steelers should be terrible, and I don't want to see everyone have a winning record. I want to see the Steelers suck. They can draft Arch Manning at some point, but I don't want to see it this year. I want them to suck. Just let them suck, please. Let Russell Wilson retire, maybe be a Hall of Famer. Justin Fields can go off to obscurity. I don't want to see it anymore.
Yeah. It's not let Russ cook anymore. It's let Russ golf.
No, it's let Russ die. Let Russ retire.
No,
Not
let
die.
Russ golf. Retire.
Let Russ,
golf.
Yes, let Russ retire. That's a good ring to it. I can't see it anymore. This team is easily my least favorite team in all of the AFC right now because they're probably going to make the playoffs, which is the most annoying part when they shouldn't. Nonetheless, NFC time. Time to move to the NFC. You pick. You know what? I want to talk about the NFC North first because I need to get my spirits up. Detroit Lions. We talked about them earlier. Very high on the Lions. Last sentiment on the Lions. Super Bowl contender, absolutely. Maybe the best team in the NFC.
Yeah, Super Bowl contender. I think they stay strong this season. And if you want to talk about a team where you miss football, football's coming back, you want to get into the reason why you love football, well, just think about the Lions are now going to be back on TV, biting kneecaps, back with the grit. They smashed every single record last year. And the thing with the Detroit Lions is people trying to say, oh, Super Bowl or conference championship hangover because they lost to the 49ers last year. But it's the team that loses in the conference championship that comes back with a vengeance, where we have Jahmyr Gibbs coming back in his second year. We still have David Montgomery. We have Sam Laporta there. We still have Brock Wright on this team. We addressed the secondary issue, which is what's haunted the Lions over the past few years. And Ben Johnson has come back on this team. It's still a very young team, and it's finally going to be a year where Jameson Williams is going to show what he can do because he utilized that in the conference championship game. So I think we're back with a vengeance. We're back with grit. We're back with toughness. And when you mention Lions, when you mention the Detroit Lions, what should that mean? Excitement. It should get your juices going, getting you ready for football again, because the Lions embody everything good about football, from their coach to all the players on that team who are doubted in the draft. It's time that the Lions get over the hump this year in a tough division, but with the Lions, just excitement for football.
Absolutely. I agree. I think the Lions, they still have plenty to prove, right? They had that lead. They blew it in the conference title game. That was heartbreaking to watch, especially at a Lions bar. Um, but I think Amon Ra is at peak form. Sam Laporta is at peak form. Jameer Gibbs is at peak form. Jared Goff, Aiden Hutchinson, who could be contending for Defensive Player of the Year. We got great linebackers now. Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell, and then Derek Barnes stood up for them last year. Brian Branch. Their secondary should be better now. They made some trades, and they got Terrion Arnold as well. So this team should absolutely be there. My only concern with the Lions is about the other teams in the AFC North and how good they'll be, because they were 12. They should have been 13-4, but they were 12-5 last year. Maybe they're 11-6 this year. But I think all three of the teams we're about to mention are going to make the playoffs this year. And I honestly think it's a lock, but we'll go over those other teams later. Lions should be a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, for sure. And I think next best team to go over would be the other team that made the playoffs last year, Green Bay Packers. Overall
Absolutely.
sentiment on the Cheese Boys.
I'm very high on the Packers. I think Jordan Love is arguably the best quarterback in the NFC at this point. I think that their weapons are all extremely dangerous because nobody really knows them that well, because they're all kind of the pseudo 1, 2, 3 wide receivers, 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. Christian Watson's really solid. Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks, but all of them are super young, and all of them can have more development time. I think at the end of the season, we're going to be talking about Romeo Dobbs as their best receiver and Jaden Reed right behind him. But they got Josh Jacobs. I think that's an improvement from Aaron Jones just because of how young he is. And then their defense, I am a little worried about their defense because I think it's just kind of average at this point, maybe slightly above average. But I think this is another team. Jordan Love has the potential to make an NFC title game, maybe a Super Bowl if they play their cards right. Very high on the Packers.
Yeah, I'm high on the Packers too. And I think with everything you said there on offense. And the thing is, with Matt LaFleur, everyone was talking about what is Matt LaFleur going to be with our Aaron Rodgers, but no one talked about what Aaron Rodgers was going to be without Matt LaFleur. And the thing with him is, when he got to the Packers, he helped Aaron Rodgers win back-to-back MVPs with his offense. And he really modernized the Green Bay Packers offense. They had one of the best offenses in the NFL last year, where every single player was on motion, and every single play it was always a little bit of misdirection here. Then you talk about how you're worried about their defense. Well, thing is, their defense was good enough last year to make CeeDee Lamb cry on the sideline. So maybe worried about it, but I think it'll be just fine when you have top 5 receivers in the NFL crying about how good the other team's defense is, because his quarterback has no idea what he's doing, even though he wants 60 million per year.
That's true. Yeah, the Packers, they're super young. Last year, they had nothing to really prove. They came in with low expectations, annihilated the Cowboys, played the 49ers competitively, and almost made the NFC title game last year. So I think I feel confident putting the Packers in the NFC title game this year. But again, it comes down to the Lions. And then the next team that we'll talk about in just a second, very high on the Packers, very high on the Lions. I'm also very high on the Chicago Bears. We saw preseason. I don't buy into the preseason all that much, but I think it did solidify that Caleb Williams is special. Caleb Williams is going to be really good in the NFL. I think by week 8, we're going to be talking about him as a top 10 quarterback. And by the end of the season, I think he'll be in the conversation for at least 6 or 7, maybe top 5, depending how he plays. But this team, for me, on offense, I don't really see much of a hole. They have great receivers. They have a great tight end in Cole Kmet. DeAndre Swift's a really solid running back. On their defense was a top 5 defense at the second half of the year. Montez Sweat really helped them out a lot. You have like Tremaine Edwins and TJ Edwards. Their secondary is pretty solid with Jalen Johnson and Jaquan Brisker. I think that they're going to be really good. I think their ceiling is Super Bowl, but I feel like realistically they should be a playoff team. I think that you should see them. I think they can win a playoff game. I can't quite put them in the Super Bowl, but I do think that they're going to be extremely good next year.
Yeah, and I think with the Bears are the team where that's what gives me the most doubt for the Packers and the Lions because I think if you take the Bears out of it, you could argue a case for Bears or Packers Lions in the conference championship game. However, I do think there's a good chance that all three of these teams make the playoffs and with the Bears schedule, you potentially get home field advantage and the thing with them is they gave the Lions a lot of trouble last season. Even with Justin Fields and that defense was coming alive. Montez Sweat is actually happy and is where he wants to be. And now you have Roma Dunze on that team. You have three legitimate wide receivers with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. And if Caleb Williams comes on at the end of the year, this is also another team. Wouldn't be surprised if they made the Super Bowl because Patrick Mahomes did in his first year in the NFL. And I think you definitely have a chance with Caleb Williams where the most dangerous time for him is this year because teams won't necessarily know how to game plan for him yet. If you can save enough of it for the playoffs, I think the Bears can beat most teams in the NFC playoffs if they don't run into a team in their division. But maybe his youth gets the best of him, but I still think there's a chance that they can make the Super Bowl.
I think so too. I'm pretty high. I think that they have. I feel more confident about their defense than the Packers. And then their offense. I mean, these are all solidified guys. DJ Moore has been exceptional with bad quarterback play. Roma Dunze and him seem like they already have a chemistry there. They've been throwing with each other in the offseason. And then Keenan Allen's just a veteran at this point. Cole Kmet was great with Justin Fields. And then DeAndre Swift, you just need him to have 1,000-yard season and he'll be fine. Um, him and Khalil Herbert, running game doesn't matter as much, but um, I believe in their defense a lot. And I think he's going to make their job a lot easier on the offensive side. So, Bears, I think they're the most dark horse Super Bowl team in really all of the NFL, never mind the NFC.
Yeah, and I think you'll have people picking them. If there's anything that holds them back in the playoffs, probably be the lack of a run game because you can't rely on DeAndre Swift because he only plays well until about week 8 or 9, and then he just goes MIA, and you forget he's even in the NFL.
Yeah, no, that's the thing with D Swift. But Khalil Herbert's also there, so he's fine as well. The running game, I'm not super worried about their running game, but I think D Swift's good enough as a running back for them to be serviceable in that spot. Um, Last team is the Vikings. This is a team, honestly, in my opinion, I feel like they should just suck this year and tank and try to get one of these top quarterbacks, whether it's a Shador Sanders or whether it's Quinn Ewers, whoever it might be in the draft this upcoming year. I just think Sam Darnold's your QB. You have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. I think that I heard is going to be out for the first 4 games. I think I don't think they're going to do very well. They're definitely the fourth best team in that division. Is there any shame in them just sucking, or at least just being a competitive bad like the Cardinals were last year, so that they can get their quarterback this upcoming year? I don't see any shame in it personally.
Yeah, I don't see any shame in it, and I think they're a team that should be bad, but I think they have so much talent, it'll be hard for them to be bad because you do have talent on the defensive side of the ball, and you have two very good minds on the defensive side of the ball, and Brian Flores, where the Vikings defense was substantially better as the season went on last year. And then you also have Mr. Robot as your head coach there. So I definitely think that you'll be able to have success even with someone like Sam Darnold who's seeing ghosts because you have so many weapons on your team, like a Jordan Addison, and then the addition of Aaron Jones, where it was a team last year that had success with backup quarterbacks without a run game. I mean, how many times did we have to hear the name uttered who shall not be named for the Minnesota Vikings at running back? I'll say it, Cam Akers last year. But now you have Aaron Jones. It's a pretty big upgrade. So you have really good players on offense.
You do, and that's the thing that's frustrating. It's like they're right there. They have two great receivers. One of them arguably the best in football. TJ Hawkinson is a top 3 tight end, top 5 tight end in the NFL. And then they have some nice pieces on defense. Like, they just need a quarterback. But the problem is, you let Kirk Cousins walk. You were too good to draft a quarterback last year. Plus, maybe it wasn't your draft. But this upcoming draft looks a lot better. So either they trade up for a quarterback this upcoming draft, or they're just a good, bad team. There's nothing wrong with that. Cardinals were a good, bad team. They got Maserati Marv. I think the Vikings will be in a similar position. But then let's go over the NFC East, because this is a division where the last 20 years there's been a different winner. Last year was the Cowboys, so inevitably it will not be the Cowboys. So why don't we start with the Cowboys? What did they do this offseason? Just as much as we did this offseason. Absolutely fucking nothing. They lost Tony Pollard. They lost some key players on defense as well. They kept the same coach who got killed by the Packers. How do we feel about the Cowboys?
Kind of gleeful about the Cowboys this year, because this is a year where I feel like the Cowboys are going to be terrible and miss the playoffs. How do you go into the season without a running back on your team? I don't understand. Deuce Vaughn, no, he's not the answer. You go out there and sign Ezekiel Elliott, and who do you have at tight end besides CeeDee Lamb? And on the show, we're one of the first shows to point it out, where their offensive line continues to get older each year, and it keeps getting worse every single year. And it's something where they haven't really focused on addressing it. So I think that'll be a huge problem for them. And then you're also going to have the beef with Dak Prescott, where Dak Prescott's going to be playing for a contract this year. He's going to want his money. So it's going to be one of the most probably toxic situations for the Cowboys, where I don't think Dak Prescott's top priority this season is winning a Super Bowl. I think the top priority this offseason, and it should be, is going to be maximizing his money. Same with Micah Parsons, and then also bringing back the same head coach that led an epic meltdown. Like, this is bringing back Brandon Staley for the Chargers last season, and I didn't think Mike McCarthy should have been back the year before. When How do you let a player slide against the 49ers? Oh, we need to stop the clock. So what I'm going to do, instead of throwing the ball away, is run for a first down and slide when the clock is just going to run out, when we're down 6 to the San Francisco 49ers and trying to win a game. How does that happen? And now you keep getting worse and worse each year. Won the division last year, kind of just ready for them to be bad this year. Then they're going to draft a quarterback and move on from Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy and start fresh. Hopefully.
I think they should start fresh. I think they'll still be in the playoff hunt, because I just think the NFC is a lot weaker than the AFC. But they're definitely not winning their division. I think that's a certain. They barely won the division last year. If they didn't have that Lions game, they would not have won that division. So them not winning the division this year should not be a hot take, especially because their run game got considerably worse. They have Zeke Elliott, Rico Doidle, Deuce Vaughn, and now they're trying to sign Delvin Cook. So good luck with that. And then you do lose a key coordinator on the defensive side. Dan Quinn, he's now coaching the Commanders. I think that's a big enough loss on the defensive side. I think their defense will still be front runners. I think they'll still beat up on the Panthers and these other bad offenses, but their defense was exposed last year by the Packers, and I think they've been exposed by other good offenses. Their defense is a fake good defense. So Cowboys, I think they're going to have a losing record. I think that you can see them at 8-9. I'm comfortable putting them at 8-9. Although I think if things really go south, we could see a really ugly Cowboys season. A couple of years ago, we thought the Broncos with Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson, people were putting them as Super Bowl contenders. I think this is a similar team, a team that's going to potentially implode a little bit, especially with the locker room tension. With CeeDee Lamb just got paid, Dak Prescott wants to get paid, and so does Micah Parsons. Tension in the locker room, especially with Mike McCarthy. This is a team I think that's going to be one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL.
Absolutely. And they shouldn't be disappointing. And another team that people have expectations for, I'm not sure why, but is the New York Giants, they get better on defense, pick up Brian Burns, and they draft a wide receiver. However, no Saquon Barkley. The owner is like, okay, we cannot let Saquon Barkley go, right? And they're like, yeah, we're not going to let him go. And then GM just walks up to him. We think you should just try out the market and then we'll match whatever you get. Owner comes back, hey, why is Saquon Barkley signing with the Philadelphia Eagles? I don't know. Why is he signing with the Philadelphia Eagles? We thought he would just go get an offer and come back to us and just let us match it for him. But no, you didn't show Saquon that you cared, and you have the worst quarterback in the league at this point. I know there's quarterbacks maybe technically worse than him, but Daniel Jones is easily the worst quarterback in the league as far as where people try and argue that, oh, he's not that bad, and the amount of money that he's making.
I think the Giants, we talked about the Vikings a couple of segments ago. The Giants have every reason to suck this year. Daniel Jones is getting paid $140 million, and he has no reason to. When we saw last year that Tommy DeVito run the offense better than he did, that Tyrod Taylor did, and now they lost Saquon, who was their offense, and now they're relying on a rookie, Malik Neighbors, to be their number one. And I do like Malik Neighbors, but he could be in the worst wide receiver rookie position of anybody by far in this draft. It's a nightmare. I mean, the fact that he called off a bet with somebody saying that he was going to be offensive rookie of the year, played one draft with Daniel Jones and immediately canceled, that should be enough for you. Also, this is a team that has historically been terrible with forming an offensive line. Daniel Jones, whoever's behind center, gets mauled every game. I'm pretty sure in that game on Monday Night Football, he got sacked, 13 times? Their
Mhm.
offensive line's terrible. I understand they got Brian Burns for nothing. And now they have Dexter Lawrence and Aziz Ojolari, Bobby Okereke, big fan, Kayvon Thibodeau. But the rest of that defense does nothing for me. And ultimately, and maybe this is a hot take, if you don't score points, you still don't win the game. So even though you're pitching 10 points on the other side, you still need to score 10 points to tie that game. I think the Giants ultimately are not going to be very good. I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the NFC, and they'll be drafting a quarterback this draft.
You would think.
One would think. You should. Let's say that. You should draft one. Yeah, I'm not very high on the Giants. I think the Giants are a mess. Their offensive line sucks. Their tight end sucks. Their wide receivers suck. Outside of Malik Neighbors, the rest of them, they're not going to be threes anywhere else. Um, Somebody can try to talk me into Wandell Robinson, but it's not going to work. Jalen Hyatt, I don't trust him either. So who am I supposed to rely on? Tyron Tracy, Devin Singletary. What are we talking about here? We don't even know if Malik Neighbors is good. And he's the only bright spot on that offense at this point. It's not the QB, that's for sure. Not the tight end, not the offensive line. This Giants offense will be worse than the Patriots offense, I believe. And I do think it could arguably be worse than the Panthers offense at this point. They could have the worst offense in the NFL this upcoming year.
Oh, for sure.
So
Easily.
Giants.
And
So
you could say, well, the Giants have every reason to suck this year, but they don't have anyone else to blame them themselves because they really only have one reason that they suck this year, and that's Daniel Jones. But the problem that he's on the team and in the starting role is a problem with coaching. It's a problem with Brian Dayball allowing them to re-sign him, and it's a problem with the ownership thinking that was a good idea. So you think it's one reason, then you peel back the layers of dysfunction, and you're like, okay, that's why the Giants have not been good in a long time.
the onions of atrocity bear witness to the Big Apple. Quote Brick Jameson, 8/27/2024. The onions of atrocity bear witness to the Big Apple. Put that on a
But
mug.
thankfully, the Commanders are in the division, and that can give the Giants fans some semblance of hope. At least we don't have sewage leaking into our stadium. At least we have hot water in New Jersey. At least we're not in DC. At least we're not the Commanders.
At least we're not the Commanders. I will say the Commanders are teasing that they might get new jerseys. So That's good. That's good at least. I think the Commanders are going to be one of those teams who start off hot and then completely fall apart for a couple of reasons. So I think that ultimately they're going to be the third best team in that division. Um, ultimately, it's like how good is Jaden Daniels is what it comes down to. Terry McLaurin's very good. Brian Robinson, he's good. Austin Eckler, we'll see what's left of him. Same with Zach Ertz. But other than that, like their defense, not super impressed with their defense. A lot of old players. Dan Quinn, what can he do? This is a rebuilding team. Ultimately, I look at their schedule, right? Their schedule, they start off with Tampa, New York, the Bengals in September, and the Cardinals and the Browns. So that's 5 teams. And they face the Panthers in week 7. I think you could see them win 3 or 4 of those games. But then the rest of the season, when they go off and face the playoff teams, I think they fall apart. I think they're going to end up winning like 5 or 6 games this year. And maybe they're better with Jaden Daniels. We don't know, but I don't think they make the playoffs by any means.
No.
So that's my
Which takes
sentiment on the
us.
Commanders.
Yeah, and then with the Commanders too, it's like, can we not tease that we're getting new uniforms? For me to believe in this team, they have to come out and say, yeah, the Commanders was a terrible idea. I don't know why they put a poll out there and they decided to go with the worst option possible. And we're building a new stadium and we have a new name. Until you do that, nothing's going to change. You have to do what Dan
True.
Campbell did with the Lions, hike to the top of Mount Tibet, train with Liam Neeson like Christian Bale did in Batman Begins. Got to turn this around. Same like pretty much every single team in the NFC South has to do at this point.
Exactly. Exactly. One last thing about the NFC East. The Eagles are the team that we believe in the most, but we do agree this team will win the division, but there's a lot of question marks. Does that sound right? Just a quick summary of the Eagles.
Yeah, you'll probably win the division, but you'll probably lose to the Bears, Packers, or Lions, whoever's in that wild card spot in the first round. Definitely a team that's probably going to lose. I think a team like the Cardinals could beat them. If the Rams are somehow in a wild card position, I could see them beating the Eagles as well. I don't think they're going to win a playoff game next year.
I don't, which sucks because I have a great team overall, but I just think there's something in the air there that just doesn't pan out for me. But then we have the NFC South. So we'll pivot there. The Bucks, right? They won the division last year. They brought back everybody: Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Everyone is back at the helm for the most part. They were 9-8. They beat out the Saints for the division last year. Seems like they have a similar scenario to the NFC East, where seems to be a different division winner each year. The Bucks. Thoughts on the Buccaneers?
I think the Buccaneers are in an interesting position, but with them, you have Baker Mayfield there. Now he's on another new offensive coordinator. Yes, he hasn't gotten traded this season. He doesn't have a new head coach, but it's still a new, technically, coach for him because it's a different offensive coordinator. And I think you did lose some depth on defense, and you're relying on players who have gotten older, like a Levante David coming in there. So just not completely sold on the run game. You have Mike Evans. It's kind of Mike Evans or bust, but I just think this is a year where I actually think you get worse this year in the offseason. So I think you'll be competitive, but I don't think you're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. I think they were 9-8 last year. I think they lose a game. I think they're going to be 8-9 this year. Not only that, last year they were 9-8 with a +23 differential. A lot of close games. And we know in the NFL that can swing in either direction. I think Tampa's still going to be competitive in that division because you have 2 teams that are pretty bad overall. But ultimately, I think they got some breaks last year, and this year they might not get those breaks. I think 8-9 is fair for the Bucks, but they're not going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, that's fair. I think too, like the close game thing is a thing you definitely have to look at when you're trying to predict what a team does, because usually those do tend to slightly go the other way, at least 75% more in the other direction than next season.
I mean, we saw last year. Last year, the Vikings were an example. 2 years ago, they were 11-0 in one-score games. The very next year, I think they were 0-8 in those one-score games. They had a lot of close games that they didn't pull off. So another prime example. And I don't think the Bucks are that level of extreme like those teams were, but I still think it's worth mentioning. Um, the Saints. Let's get the Saints out of the way. and then we'll go over Tepperville afterwards. The Saints, Derek Carr, Helvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and then that defense. How do you feel about the Saints here?
I don't care. I think at this point, you should have gotten rid of Dennis Allen last year, but teams like the Saints are just frustrating where they're just stuck in the middle and you're in the worst position possible where you're not necessarily bad enough to get another quarterback or change your franchise, but you're not good enough where you're going to do anything remotely interesting. And the fact that the most interesting headline week in and week out is Taysom Hill for your organization, that should tell you all you need to know. You took the player who had the most touchdowns the season before last season in Jamal Williams, and he only got one touchdown last year. You haven't done anything since you figured out if you can't injure people and take out the opponent's best player, then you can't have any success in the NFL, which is what the Saints have been since Bountygate. So, no, Dennis Allen wasn't the heir for Sean Payton. I think you should have tried that out for a year, and if it didn't work, pull the plug. But now we're on year 3. Why? Like, what has he done to give you confidence that you're like, okay, Dennis Allen should be our coach of the future, and we can spend another how long rebuilding? Because you're not going to be rebuilt this year, and you already gave the guy 2 years before that. So what exactly are we doing here? He's not a head coach who you can just give to and say, hey, rebuild the roster. So it's going to take another 2-3 years. So why wouldn't you just move on with a new head coach and a new quarterback who has a new vision next year, unless your plan is to write it out with Derek Carr and Dennis Allen and suck this year and just fire everybody, trade everyone, and then have some really good draft picks. But that would be the only reason you would keep both of them.
Yeah, I don't understand what they're trying to do. I don't know if that's just a one more year sort of thing. I know Derek Carr's contract was 4 years, 100 million, but what else is their vision at that point? Like, I see a lot of decent players on their team, and I think that they should be competing for the wild card spot, but I don't think they're better than any of the teams in the NFC North outside of maybe the Vikings right now. And I think that they're still worse than the Cowboys and Eagles as well on the NFC East side. We haven't even gone over the West yet. I think the Saints, like, I just don't know what they're doing. Like, they're going to be the same team each year. They're going to be average. They're going to be like the 8-9, 9-8 every year until they decide to just suck. Not only that, they've been in salary cap hell since we've been born, basically. So it's like, what are we doing here? I also don't trust their wide receiver core very much. They have Chris Olave, who's really good. The rest of the team, there's question marks. And then, other than that, I don't trust their coach. I'm fading the Saints this year. Is moral of the story. Um, let's get over Tepperville because you have watched everyone who is or watching this has been friends of the show. They have watched the worst top fives the last 2 years. They understand who is a perennial worst top five because this team is pretty much the consensus number one every single week because they're just awful at literally everything. They can't do anything right. That is the Carolina Panthers. What did they do? Let's summarize the last 2 years. They traded away basically Caleb Williams and DJ Moore for Bryce Young. They needed wide receiver help because they had a hole at wide receiver after trading a wide receiver one in DJ Moore. So they went out and got Adam Thielen to fix that problem. And then this past season, they went out this offseason, they got Deontay Johnson, who is known for dropping passes just as much as he is for catching them. And then, oh, yeah, last year, the thing that they were good at slightly was their defense. Brian Burns and Frankie Louvu leading the show, and they walked out the door. So they now have to rely on Derek Brown and Jadeveon Clowney to lead
Ugh.
the helm on defense. Yeah,
Ugh.
exactly. A wincing name at Jadeveon Clowney. So Panthers, they got better on offense, worse on defense. Will they be better than 2-15? Who cares?
Yeah.
That's my
You
10th.
ask the real thing you should have said could have saved you all that when it's how do you feel about the Panthers this year? See you next year.
See you next year. I
See you
beg
next.
that Bryce Young just leaves Carolina
He
because
should ask for a trade. He should have when they traded DJ Moore. Should have been like, "What are you? No, no, I'm out."
Bryce
He should
Young
have
just
asked for a
take the heat.
trade in the middle of the
Because
season.
you're telling me that the Vikings wouldn't be better with Bryce Young, and Bryce Young would not be better with the Vikings. Get him to the Panthers. I know that the Panthers won't because that's their future, but Bryce Young is rotting in Carolina, and it's a shame because he doesn't deserve it. He just was the best player in college. They drafted him, and now he's suffering, and nobody deserves to suffer like this. I think they'll be better than 2-15, but what does that even mean? When I say that they're going to be better than 2-15, what does that mean? You can't like that's not a hot take. They can go 3-14 and I'll be right. Like I think their max is 4 wins and I think their floor is 0 wins. So what does that mean? They can win between 0 and 4 games. Bravo, you made it. At worst, you will be the number 1 overall pick. At worst, you will be the number 2 pick. Congratulations, Panthers.
At least you have a pick this time.
Yeah, exactly. At least this isn't going to turn out to be Caleb Williams. So can't get any worse, right? So maybe the ceiling, maybe they are on the up, I suppose, but they can't get much lower. So, good for them.
Yeah, David Tepper. Maybe he keeps a coach past 1 year. Maybe. We'll
Maybe.
see.
We'll see. Last team that has the most hype going into this season, that is the Atlanta Falcons. What is their story the last few years? Taylor Heineke, Desmond Ritter. I'm forgetting a lot of other terrible names. The Falcons, they got their QB, Kirk Cousins. They also have Bijan, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. Maybe he pans out. And they added a few other players on defense. Falcons have the most hype. How do we feel about the Falcons?
Falcons, you gotta figure out an offense outside of Cordero Patterson. Like you can't rely on a 40-year-old punt returner turned running back by the New England Patriots to be the guy this year. I have faith in them. I believe they should win the division. I believe so, but Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles injury and then also having Michael Penix, who is perennially hurt in college, this is a team that I think could disappoint a lot of people. And I think there is like a strong 40% chance that they make the playoffs. But I also think 60% chance is still there for letdown. And I think it's a weak 60% and a strong 40% they make the playoffs. If that makes sense to everybody. I know some of you will pick up on that, but I still think there's a lot of room for disappointment for them.
I agree. I look at this team and I look at the hype around them. We love Kirk Cousins on the show. I'm a big fan of Kirk Cousins, but he's going from Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. In the past, he's had Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen to Drake London, who's a good receiver, Darnell Mooney, fine receiver, Ray McLeod the third. Okay.
The
I have a lot
third.
more questions. I have a lot more questions now. Rondell Moore, who they won't even have until week 5. So really, it's like we need Bijan Robinson to be the bell cow, and we need to see what Kyle Pitts is finally. He's in the witching hour of his career. Is he a bust, or is Kyle Pitts like good? I am leaning towards him being a bust because he was drafted ahead of Jamar Chase, who would be very nice on this team right now if he was their player. And then on defense, like they added Matt Judon, they have Jesse Bates, Justin Simmons, AJ Terrell. But I do think that this is a team that is overhyped right now. Their ceiling is their division, but I don't think they win a playoff game. And I don't think you should look at Kirk Cousins as your savior for a team in any capacity. Like Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. He's not going to be your Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or whoever else you want to throw into that umbrella. He's been very good and efficient with the Vikings, but that's also with the Kevin O'Connells of the world, who are a very good play caller. But I just think this is probably the worst talent he's had around him since the Commander days, where he was like solid but not great. So I think they're still going to win the division, but let's pump the brakes on the Falcons a little bit.
Yeah. And, They're talking about, like, there goes my hero. You saw Creed the other day, but wasn't talking about Kirk Cousins. He's not someone like, how did he just become this guy this offseason? Oh my God, the Falcons got Kirk Cousins, so now they're a contender. Like, Kirk Cousins in the playoffs being a contender, like, you just go from ripping a guy, oh, he's on a new team now, so he's going to save them. All their problems are solved. All of these Kyle Pitts is suddenly going to snap out of it. Drake London's suddenly going to be an elite receiver when he's leaving one of the best offensive head coaches he's ever had, and he's leaving the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. That you can argue if you want Hill, but for the sake of this argument, he's the best receiver in the NFL, winning you a lot of games where he was the guy you go to. So you don't have a guy that Kirk Cousins that can just close his eyes and throw it up to like he could in the past to Justin
Mm,
Jefferson. So I don't understand how the media kind of went from Kirk Cousins isn't the guy. He's all stats. He's overinflated to, oh, yeah, now he's your savior. Even though this is the same guy who lost a playoff game to Daniel Jones. Come on,
yeah,
guy. Throw the ball
exactly.
past the first down if you want to win the game.
Exactly. Not a believer of the Falcons, but I do think they still win that division. Last division to go over, NFC West. Um, let's start with the Niners because obviously they just made it to the Super Bowl. If they knew the overtime rules, they might be talking about being the Super Bowl champions potentially. We alluded to this earlier. You and I both have very similar concerns with the 49ers that I don't think the rest of the NFL talk is talking about. Christian McCaffrey is questionable for week one. Jawan Jennings is questionable. Brandon Ayuk wants a contract. Debo Samuel has missed time the last 3 years. And then Trey Greenlaw, Fred Warner, Talal Hufanga, and Leonard Floyd are all questionable entering into week one. Not only that, they have the Super Bowl hangover to deal with. They have the Madden curse with Christian McCaffrey, and inevitably the Kyle Shanahan curse, which is what we've seen the last 3 times that he's been to the Super Bowl. What happens? So the 49ers, did I nail it? We talked about this earlier, so not too much to gripe on, but the
Yeah.
49ers.
Yeah, with the 49ers, it's this year. You're coming off a Super Bowl loss, and all you have to do if you want to kind of figure out what's going to happen the next season is just look at history and what happened when the 49ers lost the Super Bowl last time to the Kansas City Chiefs. Every single player on their team got hurt, and that's pretty normal for a team that just got to the Super Bowl and lost. We saw the Philadelphia Eagles completely collapse, and these teams will typically start out hot. You kind of have that momentum remembering the Super Bowl, but I think this team is due for a collapse in the middle of the season. They've kind of been pressing on the door, but I think it's going to press in the other direction this year, where you mentioned Debo has gotten hurt. George Kittle is concerning. Nick Bosa is another year older. And then how many times are we going to have to hear about Kyle Shanahan, best run game designer in the NFL, best run schemer in the league that we've seen the past decade. Yet anytime he needs to run the ball, he can't. So I think this is a year where the 49ers are primed for a letdown. I think they're going to get back to the Super Bowl. No, and I wouldn't be surprised if they had a bad hangover and ended up collapsing in the middle of the season.
I agree. I think we're going to see it sooner than you think. The good news is that they did sign Josh Dobbs, so we might see Josh Dobbs later this year. Another team that made the playoffs from this division last year, though, the Niners. The Rams.
The
We
Rams.
have Matt Stafford, Jimmy Garoppolo, Stetson Bennett, Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. The list goes on. Um, First year without Aaron Donald, but Rams. How do we feel about the Rams going into week one?
Yeah, I think dark horse Super Bowl candidate is how I feel about the Rams right now. You do lose Aaron Donald, but I think that defense will be good enough. But the thing with the Rams is who's going to stop this team? Because you have Cooper Kupp on this team who won the Triple Crown, dealt with some injuries last year, but Puka Nacua stepped right up and filled in. Have Kyron Williams there. You have Sean McVay, and it seemed like this team was getting their mojo back. And I think Stafford, for him, if he can ride off into the sunset with a second Super Bowl victory and have one last hurrah, and never know if the Rams got past the Lions, maybe we are talking about them getting to the Super Bowl last year. But I think this year they definitely have a strong chance to win the division and potentially get back to the Super Bowl under Sean McVay for a third time.
I agree. I think the Rams will win the division. That's one of my bold takes. And I think that they have a chance. I don't think they're better than the NFC North teams, but I think they're right up there with them. So I think that they'll still be competitive. They should be a contender in the NFC. So I do agree with the Rams being the best team in this division currently, with all the things considered. I want to pivot to the Cardinals as well. I'll be right next door to them real soon. We have Kyler back with a full season. He was obviously hurt the first half of last season. James Conner at running back. They got Marvin Harrison, number 4 overall, and very hard team to predict. I feel they have decent players across the board. Just whether or not we believe in Jonathan Gannon and the new look Cardinals. But thoughts on the Cardinals final week of the season?
Yeah, I think the Cardinals this season are going to embody their quarterback, and they're going to come up just a little bit short this season. I think they're going to be competitive. Think they'll be better under Maserati Marv, push for a wild card, and I think that's where they'll be in the mix for. But I think they'll come up just short and end up falling a little bit shorter than maybe they were planning on this season or their trajectory where the momentum was taking them. So I think they have the potential to be in the mix for a wild card game, like a 25% chance to make the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to win a playoff game. And I think they're going to end up having a disappointing end to their season.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals look like a pretty solid 8-9 team. I think they're going to have a situation where they're going to end the season feeling optimistic moving forward. Their offense, I think, is going to be a pretty high functioning offense. Kyler Murray, at his best, is a really good quarterback. I can't call him great quite yet. James Conner is efficient. He's been a touchdown machine since going to Arizona. And they have a rookie that's looking promising in camp. I think Marvin Harrison's going to step in and immediately be a top 10 wide receiver in the league. And then Michael Wilson's a really solid receiver. He was solid, one of the few bright spots last year. And then Trey McBride, a lot of people are really loving as well in camp as well. So I think their offensive line's better. Their offense should be, I think it's going to be a above average offense. Their defense, that's when their coach comes in. How efficient can their defense be? They were a sneaky, decent team last year. They were one of those good, bad teams who played really competitive. Not a lot of losses there. I think 8-9 is fair for them. I think at best they're going to be 9-8, and maybe they sneak into the playoff spots. But ultimately, I think the Cardinals, they're not quite there, ready to compete, but they are in a better position than I think a lot of people think.
Yeah,
So
they're definitely in a better position, and I think they'll be better this year than they were last year. But can't really wrap my arms around Kyler Murray because there's not really enough of him for me to wrap my arms around.
that is very fair. Then the last team to go over is the Seahawks. I don't know, honestly. Their defense, a lot of nice players on defense. I love Tariq Woolen. I love Devon Witherspoon, Leonard Williams. Great teams overall, but overall, I just I have my questions. Geno Smith, the first year with the Seahawks, a lot of magic. Ever since it feels like he's slightly regressed. He's a lot older of a quarterback at this point. It's going to be entering year 34. Um, I just don't really know their direction. This is their first year without Pete Carroll. Typically, those years end in mediocrity. So I think they're going to probably be like 7-10, 7-10, 6-11, 8-9 range. But really depends on if they hit on head coach or not.
Yeah, and I don't think it really matters if they hit on coach because he's a defensive guy and that'll be his specialty. And I think the defense will be good and will be better than it was last year. But with the Seahawks, it's the same question of the Saints where it's like, what are we doing here at quarterback? We're bringing in Sam Howell. Why do we need to bring in Sam Howell? We have Geno Smith here. It's going to be two of the same guys competing. If Geno Smith goes into a slump, their fans are going to be like, look at what Sam Howell did to us last year. We threw for over 400 yards, I believe that was against the Seahawks. So they'll have some fond memories of him. But the Seattle Seahawks are kind of the Chipotle of the NFL right now, where they were really good. We're kind of holding on to that now, but the quality has definitely gone down, and we're not exactly sure where we're taking it. Are we taking it to a Taco Bell level, or are we gonna take this thing back up again and kinda fix what went wrong? It's like, I don't mind it sometimes, same with the Seahawks, but I don't really have any strong feelings positive to say about the Seahawks or negative because it's like the defense kind of balances out the mediocrity of the offense. But you have DK who's kind of embodies that, where DK sometimes he was Chipotle. Look at DK next Calvin Johnson. He can run as fast as Tyreek Hill, but you have other games where you just shit your pants the next day at the gym. And the pre workout just flushes all of that out, and it's a painful experience.
I like the Chipotle analogy. That's actually kind of spot on for the Seahawks, to be honest, because you're right. Their food, like we've talked about the fall off of Chipotle, and the Seahawks are kind of the same. We're holding on to the 2014 Seahawks, just like we're holding on to the 2014 Chipotle era. DK Metcalf is a really good wide receiver. I feel like he's capable of being a top 10 wide receiver, but he's hovering in like the 15 to 20 range because he's just inconsistent. Which DK Metcalf are we going to get? So for the Seahawks, I just don't know what I'm going to get. I just don't know what their direction is. I think this is the year that they're going to be just average. So yeah, Seahawks. I think we have similar sentiments on them.
Yeah. And that is our thoughts on every single team in the NFL. We're going to be previewing next week all of our awards. We went over this time, definitely talking about all the teams, but we'll have awards next week, predictions, and then also picking every single game of week one. You won't want to miss that because one would say week one might be the hardest week to say. I've heard a lot of people talk about week one and they say it's a hard week to predict. You never know what you're going to get. It was like, wow, what a hard week to pick.
Exactly. I'm excited. We got our first week, and then not this upcoming week, but the next week, we'll be back in the studio together as I make my way to
Boom.
Arizona.
For Monday Night Football. Be here, stay up late. I believe, yeah, this Monday is a Labor Day, so you won't be here this Monday, but the Monday after that. So pumped for that. Going to be going out for Jets 49ers. Who has any idea what's in store for that game? Is Aaron Rodgers going to make it through that game? We'll see.
Hopefully, we hope so.
I
But
feel,
yeah, who knows?
but yeah, I
But
do. No, on the show, kind of talk about music. It's not an artist and a lot of people know about, but did come out with a part one disc. Want to go over it really
oh
quickly.
yeah,
But if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Jack K's disc one. Definitely
ooh,
liked it a lot if you're into the acoustic genre. A little bit. The thing I liked about this one was he has like a little bit of a Philip Phillips vibe sometimes. A little bit
hmm,
of it comes to like with caffeine sounds kind of like home or gone gone gone, and then also he has some songs like my drinking song was kind of like a hard bluegrass rock song, and then a lot of really good kind of that coffee shop vocals, excellent singer, but goes into a little bit of more punk guitars. And we've been following him for a while. Went to a
hmm.
show where we were basically eye to eye with him, getting the crowd hyped up together.
Yeah, I like this album a lot. He's been kind of teasing a full length album for a long time. He's had a lot of EPs. I really like Cessations, and he's got a couple other really great EPs as well. Outrun Myself is one of his more popular songs as well. Mixed Emotions is the album I'm thinking of. But this is his first like full length project. And if you like alternative punk, I think that this is somebody that you'll really like. He has a pretty small catalog overall, but you can breeze through his catalog in like 2 hours. And it's just a great listen. A lot of really high energy stuff. He's got a lot of versatility, which is what I really like about Jack Hayes. And this album, you kind of get everything. You get the hits that you can play at a party like Caffeine, but then you also get some more intimate songs like Drinking Song, Plan B. Feel Like Me. If you want to cry at the gym, you can play that. So you get a lot of versatility with Jack Hayes, which is one thing I really like about him. That's why he's been one of my top artists.
Yeah, Rug was like a really good song, and that was the song where I heard that come on, like second song on the album, like oh, this is gonna go to a really good place here because it kind of sounded like that 2007 Paramore style album, and he
Hmm.
had a lot of good beat switches too. I like on Drinking Song where he has like the piano come onto it, where it kind of comes out of the guitars, and he has a lot of good like switch ups in this. You put me on a JPEG Mafia where every single song he has is like two songs, where Jack Hayes has a lot of good versatility on this album where you get a lot of different things. So if you're a fan of alternative singers looking for something to scratch that punk itch, definitely a good project.
Yeah, I'm glad you got into JPEG too. I found out after the album came out that he's actually fully independent. He's not on like signed to any label. It's all him. So he had the biggest independent release of the year with that album that he just came out with.
Yeah, it's crazy to me because I hadn't heard too much of him, but I listened to his newest album today, and I thought the album was crazy. He has
Excellent.
like a lot of dubstep there. I like the heavy guitars on it as well, and his flows are just like he just has one of those flows like, okay, yeah, I can definitely get into this. It's kind of like a Kendrick flow without like all the weird voices that Kendrick does. And then
Mhm.
I listened to his album from 2021 in
Hmm.
between these two solo releases, and then I didn't check out the collab album, but a lot of really good songs, and I like how kind of each song is like 4 or 5 minutes too, where
Yeah.
there's like you're getting 2 or 3 beat switches in each song. So I thought his production is really good, especially
Mhm.
finding out he's independent. But 2 million monthly Spotify listeners, I mean,
Yeah. He's
he
crazy.
deserves way more than that.
Oh, for sure. He's not. I can't call him like underground because I feel like there's like he's got a big enough following, but he's somebody that I feel like he's got like the production. I think he could be considered one of the best producers in the game right now, if not the best. I think he's surpassed
Mhm.
Kanye with what Kanye's been releasing of late. Um, and plus his creativity, like his sampling has been excellent. If you listen to I'm gonna think I gotta find the song to find off the top of my head. There's a song that he found, one of the songs off of the album. Um, I'll get the exact song because I can't get it off. It's off the top of my head. Oh, either on or off the drugs. What he did for that song was he took a Future song from 2012 and he put it through an AI filter and made it like a 60s soul rendition of Future. And then he sampled that song, and that was the song that you hear on that playing through. So when you listen to that again, just remember that he put that those are the sample that he used is technically Future, but
Mhm.
he sampled that through like an AI filter, and that's how we got that beat there.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, finding
Yeah,
out
he's a
he's
cool guy.
independent too. Like, there's a lot of good independent artists that like make a lot more money, but maybe they're not the most popular artists in the world. And then it's kind of funny that he's from Alabama too, where he was like in New York, moved to Alabama a little bit. So I guess the versatile Alabama rappers like him, Yellow Wolf has like the same amount of monthly listeners. So they're two like really good, I feel like rappers that everyone like kind of knows the name. Like you've heard Yellow Wolf, you've heard JPEG Mafia, and I'd heard his name like thrown around there a little bit, but I'd never checked him out and was definitely surprised. And then same with Yellow Wolf too, another diverse
Mm.
artist who has a lot of good production and flows that people know who he is, but if you check him out, another independent rapper out of Alabama.
Yeah, no, they're both excellent. And JPEG's been producing for like Denzel and Ken and Kanye and some of these big artists for the last couple of years, but now he's finally getting his flowers. Especially with this album, I think is going to be pretty massive for him, and I hope that he gets some sort of recognition from it.
Yeah, definitely. But definitely excited to see him going to a show Friday night. So that should be a
I'm
fun
jealous.
experience. It's
Yeah,
only
that's
like
going to be
25
sick.
bucks too. I was like, I looked up the venue and it was like this barbecue place. I'm like, is this the right amphitheater? But it has like a pretty big area outside. I guess it's like a kind of like a bar with like that you go to that has the concerts there. So I'm like, okay,
That's
could be a
cool.
good vibe there. Interested to see what the crowd is like though.
I think it's going to be. He throws down. He's got some like hard hitting songs, so the pit's going to be interesting.
There's
Um,
some bangers there. Definitely some elbows being thrown that night.
oh, for sure. It's be like if when I almost saw Death Grips. It's like similar like cadence. I feel like, but he's coming on the sixth. He's coming on what the sixth that is. Is that what that lands on?
He's coming Friday.
So oh, so he's coming on the 30th. Oh, damn. Okay. That's
Yeah, I
sick. You gotta
literally
let me know how that goes.
yeah, I literally popped on the album and saw it was coming. I'm like, "Oh, cool. I guess I'll go see him Friday. That's cool."
Yeah, that's sick. Yeah, I wanted to see him in Arizona, but he's already come, and then he's coming to New Hampshire on the 15th of September, which I'll be long gone by then. So it's
Just missed
unfortunate.
him both ways.
I'll be back to see him, no doubt. He's one of the biggest. He's probably the most listened to artist the last like 3 months for me. The last at least since this album came out. I've been in
Oh
a
yeah,
big phase.
as he should be. I think this is definitely top 3 for albums for me this year.
Yeah,
Like
you
this
should.
album.
Yeah, you should check out Black Ben Carson next. That's what I just listened to. And then the album that I got into him with was All My Heroes Are Cornballs. It's like it's relatively short and we got some good stuff there. If you listen to the Black Ben Carson album, I think you would like the first song. It's called Drake Era, and it's exactly what it sounds like. He's just attacking Drake rappers. And I know you're not a Drake fan, so I think you'll appreciate that.
No, never will be. Never will be converted to. So I appreciate that.
Yes, you'll appreciate JPEG. He's a hater just as much as you are.
Good, as he should be,
Damn right.
because he's someone who should be more popular than Drake.
For sure. I think he'll be pretty popular soon enough. But as far as the show, next week we're going to go over the Super Bowl predictions, the awards, and then give our predictions for how this week 1 will play out. Most importantly though, we must always stay
Brick.
brick. We have not